When Cade Ashford rode up to choose a bride from the desperate Hale household, everyone knew he'd pick the eldest daughter, beautiful, refined, trained for this moment. But when his eyes settled on Maylene, the Chinese woman kept silent in the shadows. The room went cold. Her father's face twisted. Her sister gasped, and Maylene's hands, scarred from years of work no one acknowledged, began to shake. Because in that single choice, Cade destroyed a carefully laid plan, shattered a family's illusion, and offered freedom to the one woman they'd trained to disappear. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches across the world. The Montana Territory stretched wild and unforgiving under the late September sun, all golden grass and distant mountains that promised beauty and delivered hardship in equal measure. The Hale Ranch house sat small against that vastness, its white paint peeling, its fences sagging, its pride long since mortgaged to men who didn't care about pride. Inside, everything that could shine had been polished until it hurt to look at. Maylene's hands ached from the scrubbing. She'd spent 2 days on her knees, working lye soap into floorboards that would never be truly clean, not after 20 years of Montana dust and tracked-in mud. Her fingers were raw, the skin around her nails cracked and stinging, but she kept them tucked into her sleeves now, hidden. Everything about her was meant to be hidden today. "Stand there," her father had said that morning, pointing to the corner near the kitchen. "Out of the way. If he asks about you, I'll explain that you help with the household work." Household work? As if the past 12 years of her life could be summed up so simply. As if the calluses on her palms and the ache in her lower back and the way she'd learned to make herself invisible were just incidental details, nothing that would interest a man like Cade Ashford. Elena stood in the center of the parlor now, positioned to catch the light from the window. She wore their mother's pearl earrings and a dress the color of cream, altered 3 times to fit her perfectly. Her dark hair was arranged in careful curls, her posture straight but not stiff, welcoming but not eager. She'd been coached for weeks. "Remember to smile but not too broadly," their stepmother Constance had instructed. "Ask him about his ranch, but don't seem too interested in the details. Men like to explain things. Let him feel intelligent." Maylene watched from her corner, her own dress a simple gray cotton, her hair pulled back in a single braid. No one had bothered to coach her. No one expected her to speak. The sound of horses carried through the open window, 3 riders, coming up the long road from town. Maylene's father, Gerald Hale, moved to the window, his shoulders tight beneath his Sunday coat. He was a compact man, weathered and sharp-eyed, the kind who'd spent his whole life calculating odds and hedging bets. This was his biggest gamble yet. "Remember," he said, not turning from the window, "the Ashfords are the most powerful family in the territory. This marriage would secure our future. Everything depends on making the right impression." He didn't look at Maylene when he said it. He never did. Constance fussed with Elena's sleeve one last time, then stepped back, examining her work. "Perfect," she breathed. "You're perfect." Elena's hands trembled slightly. She clasped them together, hiding it. She was 19, beautiful in the way that men expected frontier women to be, strong-featured, clear-eyed, capable. She'd been raised for this, groomed like a prize mare, taught which opinions to have and which to keep silent. Maylene had watched it happen, year after year, and felt a complicated mixture of pity and relief that she'd been spared such careful preparation. Better to be ignored than shaped into something false. The horses drew closer. Maylene could hear the creak of saddle leather now, the low voices of men comfortable with authority. Her heart beat faster despite herself, though she kept her face calm. She'd learned that early, how to keep every emotion locked away where no one could see it and use it against her. The knock came firm and sure. Gerald smoothed his vest, checked his collar, arranged his face into an expression of dignified welcome. Then he opened the door. Cade Ashford stepped into the house like he owned it, which Maylene supposed he very nearly did. Her father owed the Ashford family money. Everyone knew it, though no one spoke of it directly. This marriage negotiation was how men like Gerald Hale paid their debts without calling them debts. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He wore range clothes, dusty boots, worn denim, a shirt that had seen honest work, but there was something in the way he carried himself that spoke of education, of choices. of a life lived with options. He was maybe 30, old enough to have run cattle through hard winters, young enough that he hadn't yet developed the permanent squint of men who'd spent decades staring at horizons. Behind him came two others. One was clearly a ranch hand, older, weathered, staying back by the door with the ease of someone who knew his place. The other was different. Gideon Ashford commanded attention without asking for it. He was perhaps 60, still powerful in build, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that took in everything and gave back nothing. He wore a suit despite the heat, despite the dust, and somehow looked comfortable in it. This was a man who'd built an empire and country that broke lesser men, and he wanted everyone to know it. "Mr. Hale." Gideon's voice carried the rough edges of the frontier, but his words were precise, calculated. "Thank you for receiving us. Mr. Ashford, and Cade." Gerald shook hands, his own grip firm but not challenging. "Please, come in. May I introduce my family?" The introductions followed the expected pattern. Constance, smiling and gracious. Elena, who executed a perfect curtsy and offered exactly the right blend of modesty and interest. The Ashford men were polite, attentive, giving away nothing. Then Gerald's hand gestured vaguely toward the corner. "And this is Maylene. She helps around the house." That was it. 12 years summed up in 8 words. Maylene inclined her head slightly, kept her eyes lowered, played the part assigned to her. She was used to it. But something changed in the room. She felt it before she understood it. A shift in attention, like wind changing direction. When she glanced up, she found Cade Ashford looking directly at her, his expression unreadable but his focus absolute. Not the dismissive glance men usually gave her, cataloging and discarding. This was different. He was seeing her. The moment stretched. Maylene's breath caught in her throat. She didn't look away, couldn't look away, held by something in his gaze that felt like recognition, like he knew something about her that even she had forgotten. Gideon cleared his throat. The spell broke. "Perhaps we might sit," Gerald suggested, gesturing toward the chairs arranged carefully around the parlor. "Maylene, bring coffee." She moved immediately, grateful for the escape, grateful for something to do with her hands. The kitchen was just through the doorway, close enough that she could hear the conversation, but far enough that she wasn't part of it. Her hand shook as she poured coffee from the pot she'd kept warm all morning. The cups rattled against the saucers. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to settle the trembling. It didn't mean anything. He'd looked at her for a moment. That was all. Men looked at her sometimes, looked at her face, at her skin, cataloging difference, finding her exotic or curious or wrong. It never meant anything good. "Your ranch is quite impressive," she heard Gideon say. The words were complimentary, but the tone suggested he'd seen the sagging fences, the empty corrals, the truth beneath the polished surface. "How long have you worked this land?" 23 years, Gerald answered. "Built it from nothing. It's been hard, but honest work." Maylene arranged the cups on a tray, added the sugar bowl, the small pitcher of cream. Through the doorway, she could see Elena sitting straight-backed in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her expression pleasant and attentive. Everything a prospective bride should be. "Elena has been helping run the household for years," Constance was saying. "She's very capable, good with numbers, good with people, and she's learned to manage quite well in difficult circumstances." Translation: she could make poverty look like a choice, make deprivation look like elegance. Useful skills for a frontier wife. Maylene carried the tray in, moving quietly, serving Gideon first, then Gerald, then Cade. When she leaned forward to set his cup on the side table, she felt his attention again, that same focused weight. Her hand steadied. She would not shake in front of him. "Thank you," he said quietly. She met his eyes for just a second. Propriety allowed that much, then stepped back. His expression was still unreadable, but something in it made her pulse quicken. She retreated to her corner, hands clasped, eyes down, invisible again. The conversation continued. Business, carefully disguised as pleasantry. Gideon asked about water rights, about winter feed, about the political situation in Helena. Gerald answered with the careful optimism of a man trying to make debt look like opportunity. Elena contributed small observations, perfectly timed, showing intelligence without seeming too clever. Constance poured more coffee, played the gracious hostess, made everything look effortless. Maylene stood silent and watched and understood exactly what was happening. This was a transaction. Elena was the commodity. The Ashfords were the buyers. Gerald was the desperate seller, trying to make his offer look valuable despite everyone knowing the truth. If the deal went through, Elena would go to the Ashford ranch, become Cade's wife, and the Hale family debts would be forgiven. If it didn't, they'd lose the ranch within a year. Everyone in the room knew it. No one would say it. Perhaps, Gideon said after an hour of careful conversation, Cade might walk outside with Miss Elena, see a bit of the property, get to know each other. It was a command phrased as a suggestion. Gerald stood immediately. Of course. Elena, why don't you show Mr. Ashford the gardens? Elena rose, smooth and practiced. Cade stood as well, offering his arm with correct formality. They moved toward the door, Constance beaming, Gerald watching with barely concealed calculation. But at the threshold, Cade stopped. He turned back, looking directly at Maylene again. Perhaps both young ladies might join us, he said. I'd like to see more of the household. The room went still. Gerald's smile tightened. Maylene has work to attend to. I'm sure Elena can. I'd appreciate it, Cade said. His voice was mild, but there was iron underneath. If it's not too much trouble. It was too much trouble. It violated the entire carefully orchestrated plan. But Cade Ashford had just made a request, and Gerald Hale couldn't refuse the Ashford family anything. Of course, Gerald managed. Maylene, join them. Maylene's heart hammered. Every eye in the room was on her now. Gerald's warning, Constance's confusion, Elena's barely concealed irritation, Gideon's calculating assessment. She moved forward on legs that felt uncertain, joined Elena at the door. Cade offered his other arm to her. For a moment, Maylene couldn't move, couldn't breathe. No man had ever offered her his arm, not in courtesy, not in public. She was the Chinese woman, the outsider, the one who served. Men didn't treat her like a lady. Miss Maylene, Cade prompted, his voice gentle. She placed her hand on his sleeve, felt the solid warmth of him beneath the fabric, and let him lead her outside into the September light. Elena's fury was silent but absolute. Maylene could feel it radiating from her sister like heat from a stove. Every line of Elena's body had gone rigid, her smile frozen in place, her eyes bright with barely contained rage. But she couldn't say anything, couldn't protest, not with Cade Ashford right there and their entire future hanging on his goodwill. They walked toward the garden, such as it was. Constance had tried to maintain it, but water was scarce and time scarcer. A few hardy roses struggled against the fence, some herbs in a kitchen plot, vegetables that looked more resigned than thriving. Nothing impressive, nothing that would make a man like Cade Ashford pause with admiration. Your father said you help with the household, Cade said, looking at Maylene. What does that involve? It was a simple question. It felt like a trap. Elena jumped in before Maylene could answer. Maylene is very helpful with the cooking and cleaning. She has a talent for making things stretch, which is useful in difficult times. The words were complimentary on the surface, but the implication was clear. Maylene was a servant, useful but unremarkable. I asked Miss Maylene, Cade said. Maylene's mouth went dry. She'd spent years perfecting the art of not drawing attention, of deflecting questions, of disappearing into the background. Now this stranger was asking her to step forward, to speak, to be seen. She didn't know how. I help where I'm needed, she said quietly. Cooking, cleaning, mending, garden work. Whatever is required. And before this? Your family came from where? San Francisco, Maylene answered. My mother brought me here when I was 12. She worked as a seamstress. After she died, my father... She caught herself. Mr. Hale married my mother when I was young. After she passed, I stayed on to help the family. It was the cleaned-up version, the story scrubbed of its sharp edges. The truth was harder. Her mother had been desperate, dying, and had married Gerald Hale because he'd promised to care for her daughter. He'd kept that promise in the most minimal way possible. Shelter, food, work. Nothing more. I see, Cade said. Something in his tone suggested he saw more than she'd said. They walked in silence for a moment. Elena tried to redirect the conversation, pointing out the weak roses, the struggling vegetables, spinning it into a narrative about resilience and making beauty from hardship. She was good at it, Maylene had to admit. good at taking nothing and making it sound like something. It was what she'd been trained for. But Cade kept looking at Maylin. "What do you think of the territory?" he asked her. "Montana. Do you like it here?" Another trap. Maylin thought carefully before answering. The truth was that she'd never been asked what she liked, what she wanted, what she thought about anything. Her preferences were irrelevant. But Cade was waiting, genuinely waiting, as if her answer mattered. "It's hard country," she said finally, "but honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not." The words were out before she could stop them. Too revealing, too close to things she shouldn't say. Elena's hand tightened on Cade's arm, but Cade smiled. It was a small expression, barely there, but Maylin saw it. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." They walked back toward the house. Gideon and Gerald had moved to the porch, deep in conversation that probably involved numbers and agreements and the price of a daughter. When they saw the three approaching, they broke apart, both wearing expressions of polite interest. "Well?" Gideon asked his son. "What do you think of the property?" Cade helped both women up the porch steps before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "that I'd like to speak with Mr. Hale privately." Elena's breath caught. Hope, bright and desperate. This was it. This was the moment. Maylin felt her sister's hand tremble where it still rested on Cade's arm. Gerald nearly stumbled over himself, agreeing. Of course. Please, come into my study. We can discuss whatever you'd like." The men filed inside. Constance appeared in the doorway, her face alight with barely suppressed excitement. "Girls, come inside. Let's give them privacy." Elena moved immediately, already imagining her triumph. But Maylin hung back, looking out at the Montana landscape, at the mountains in the distance, at the sky going amber and rose with the approaching sunset. This was what her life would be now, watching from the edges while Elena married into wealth and power, while the family debt was forgiven, while everyone moved forward into a future that had no place for a Chinese woman who'd learned to disappear. She should be grateful. If Elena married well, the household would be more comfortable. There would be less work, less worry, maybe even a small allowance for Maylin's own future. It was more than she'd had any right to expect. But standing there in the fading light, Maylin let herself feel the truth she usually kept buried. She was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of living at the mercy of other people's plans. Tired of pretending that she was content with scraps when she'd been born with the same capacity for dreams as anyone else. The door opened behind her. "Maylin," Constance called, her voice sharp with irritation. "Inside, now." Maylin turned and obeyed. She always obeyed. Inside, Elena was practically vibrating with nervous energy, pacing the parlor while Constance tried to calm her. "Sit down," Constance whispered. "You look agitated. When he comes out, you need to look serene." "What's taking so long?" Elena hissed back. "What are they talking about?" Maylin moved to the kitchen, started clearing the coffee cups. Through the wall, she could hear the low rumble of male voices, but couldn't make out words. Business, terms, the mechanics of trading a daughter for financial relief. Minutes passed. 10, 15. Elena's pacing grew more frantic. Constance's reassurances grew more hollow. Maylin washed cups, dried them, put them away, tried not to think about the strange way Kate Ashford had looked at her, like he was seeing something no one else had bothered to notice. Finally, the study door opened. The men emerged. Gerald's face was unreadable, caught between emotions Maylin couldn't parse. Gideon looked satisfied, like a man who'd gotten what he came for. And Cade's expression was calm, resolved, certain. "Well," Gerald said, his voice strange and tight, "it seems we have an understanding." Elena stepped forward, her face radiant. This was it. This was the moment she'd been prepared for her entire life. Constance gripped her hands together, tears already forming. "Mr. Ashford has made his choice," Gerald continued. His eyes found Maylin, and there was something terrible in them, something like rage and disbelief and a desperate kind of calculation. "Kate is asked to marry Maylin." The words didn't make sense. Maylin heard them, understood them individually, but strung together they formed a sentence that couldn't be true. Elena made a sound like she'd been struck. Constance went pale. Gerald stood rigid, his jaw working, clearly fighting to maintain composure in front of the Ashfords. And Cade was looking at Maylene again, steady and sure, waiting. "That's impossible," Elena breathed. Father, that's not—" "The decision has been made," Gideon said, his voice cutting across Elena's protest with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Cade has chosen his bride. We've discussed terms with your father. The arrangement is acceptable to all parties." "All parties?" Elena's voice broke on the words. "You can't be serious. She's not even—" She stopped herself, but everyone heard what she hadn't said. Not even family. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. Maylene couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't process what was happening. This was wrong. This violated every understanding she had about how the world worked, about her place in it, about what men like Cade Ashford wanted from women like her. Gerald cleared his throat. "Maylene, come here." She moved on autopilot, crossing the room while her mind spun uselessly. When she reached her father's side, he gripped her arm, his fingers tight enough to bruise. His smile was rigid, his voice controlled. "Mr. Ashford has made you a very generous offer," he said. Each word sounded like it hurt him. "You should be grateful." Grateful. Yes, she should be grateful. A man of wealth and position wanted to marry her, wanted to take her away from this house, from a life of endless work and erasure. She should be grateful. But Elena was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face while Constance held her, and Gerald's grip on Maylene's arm was turning her skin white, and Gideon Ashford was watching her with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever, only cold assessment. And Cade was still looking at her like he saw her, really saw her, like she was a person, not a problem to be solved or a debt to be paid. "Miss Maylene," he said quietly, "I know this is sudden. If you need time to consider—" "She accepts," Gerald cut in. "Of course she accepts. Don't you, Maylene?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. "Accept this. Fix what your existence has broken. Make this right." Maylene looked at Elena, saw the devastation in her sister's face, the death of every dream she'd been taught to want, looked at Constance, whose plans had just crumbled to dust, looked at Gerald, whose desperation was turning to fury barely held in check. Then she looked at Cade. At the man who'd walked into this house and chosen her for reasons she couldn't understand, who disrupted everything, who was offering her something she'd never dared to want. Freedom. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe she was trading one form of servitude for another. Maybe he had reasons of his own that had nothing to do with seeing her, really seeing her. Maybe this would be worse than what she was leaving behind. But standing there with Gerald's fingers digging into her arm and Elena's sobs echoing in the silent room and the weight of 12 years of invisibility pressing down on her shoulders, Maylene made a choice. "Yes," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I accept." The room exploded. Elena turned and fled, running up the stairs with Constance calling after her. Gerald's grip on Maylene's arm tightened viciously before he released her, his face contorting with rage he couldn't express in front of the Ashfords. The ranch hand by the door shifted uncomfortably. Only Gideon remained unmoved. "Excellent," he said. "We'll arrange for the ceremony to take place in 3 days. That should give everyone time to prepare. Cade will return then to collect his bride." 3 days. 72 hours before everything changed forever. Gerald managed to pull himself together enough to shake hands, to accept Gideon's congratulations, to show them out with something resembling graciousness. But his movements were mechanical, his smile a death's head grin. At the door, Cade paused. "Miss Maylene," he said, "I'll see you in 3 days." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He held her gaze for a long moment, and again she felt that strange sensation, that he was trying to tell her something, trying to reassure her, trying to make her understand that this wasn't what it looked like. Then the Ashfords were gone, riding back toward town in the deepening twilight, and Maylene was left standing in the parlor with her father's fury filling the air like smoke. He didn't speak, didn't look at her, just walked to his study and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Maylene stood alone in the gathering dark and tried to understand what she'd just done. Upstairs, Elena was crying. Maylene could hear the broken, gasping sobs through the floorboards. Part of her wanted to go up there, to apologize, to explain that she hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it. But that would be a lie. Because standing there with Kate Ashford's attention on her like sunlight after years in shadow, she had wanted it, had wanted to be chosen, had wanted to matter, even if it destroyed everything. The next 3 days were among the strangest of Maylene's life. Elena wouldn't speak to her, wouldn't even look at her. She stayed in her room, emerging only for meals that she ate in rigid silence before retreating again. Constance moved through the house like a ghost, her usual efficiency replaced by bewildered distraction. She would start tasks and forget them halfway through, leaving bread dough unattended, setting out dishes for meals she didn't prepare. Gerald said nothing, but his silence was worse than words. He looked at Maylene like she'd betrayed him, like she'd deliberately sabotaged his plans out of spite or cruelty. Never mind that she'd had no choice in Cade's decision. Never mind that she'd been prepared to stand in her corner and disappear as always. Somehow, this was her fault. Maylene kept working. She cleaned the house, cooked the meals, tended the garden. Normal routines in an atmosphere that had turned poisonous. But her mind was elsewhere, circling the same questions again and again. Why had Cade chosen her? What did he want from her? What kind of life was she riding toward? She had no answers, no one to ask. She'd never been more alone. On the second day, Constance finally spoke to her. "You'll need a dress," she said abruptly, standing in the kitchen doorway while Maylene kneaded bread. "Something appropriate. You can't be married in that." Maylene looked down at her gray cotton dress, stained and worn. "I don't have anything else." Constance's jaw tightened. "I know." She disappeared for a moment, then returned carrying something wrapped in muslin. When she unfolded it, Maylene saw ivory silk, delicate and fine, yellowed slightly with age. "This was mine," Constance said, "from when I married your father. It won't fit perfectly, but it's better than nothing." The gesture should have been kind, but there was no kindness in Constance's face, only grim practicality. She was dressing Maylene the way she might prepare a cow for sale, making sure the merchandise looked presentable. "Thank you," Maylene said quietly. Constance nodded once, sharp and final. "We'll alter it tomorrow. Try not to ruin it before then." She left. Maylene stood holding the dress, feeling the weight of it, the history embedded in the silk. Constance had worn this when she married Gerald, when she'd come to this house full of hope and plans for the future. Had she been happy then? Had she thought she was making a choice? Maylene folded the dress carefully and carried it to her small room under the eaves. She had few possessions, some clothes, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, a small wooden box containing the only letter her mother had ever written to her. She packed them now, slowly, trying to make it real in her mind. In 3 days, she would leave this house. She would marry a man she didn't know. She would go to a place where no one wanted her, where she would always be the wrong choice, the outsider, the Chinese woman who'd disrupted their plans. She should be terrified, but lying in her narrow bed that night, listening to Elena cry through the wall and the floorboards creak with the weight of disappointment, Maylene felt something else. Hope. Fragile, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, being chosen by Kate Ashford meant she wouldn't have to disappear anymore. The morning of the third day arrived clear and cold. Maylene woke before dawn, as always, and moved through the house preparing breakfast that no one would eat. Gerald took coffee in his study. Constance picked at toast and said nothing. Elena didn't come down at all. At noon, Constance summoned Maylene upstairs for the dress fitting. She worked in tight-lipped silence, pinning and tucking the ivory silk until it hung properly on Maylene's frame. It was beautiful, or had been once. The years had dulled its luster, but the craftsmanship remained. Tiny seed pearls at the collar, delicate lace at the cuffs. Maylene stood still and let Constance work, watching herself in the spotted mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. She'd never worn anything this fine, never been treated like someone whose appearance mattered. "There," Constance said finally, stepping back. "It will do." It was the closest thing to approval Maylene would get. She changed back into her gray dress, helped Constance wrap the wedding gown carefully, and tried not to think about the fact that in a few hours, her entire life would change. The Ashfords arrived at 2 o'clock. Kate and Gideon, no ranch hand this time. They'd brought a preacher with them. A thin man in a dusty black coat who looked like he'd spent too many years riding between frontier settlements, marrying people who couldn't wait, burying those who couldn't hold on. Gerald met them at the door, his face carved into an expression of forced pleasantness. "Welcome. Everything is ready." Ready? Yes, Maylene supposed it was. The house was clean, the bride was prepared. All that remained was the transaction. She stood in her room, wearing Constance's ivory dress, her hair arranged in a simple twist at the base of her neck. No flowers, no music, no celebration. Just a ceremony that would make legal what had already been decided. Constance knocked once, opened the door without waiting for an answer. "They're waiting," she said. Then, after a pause, "You look acceptable." It was the kindest thing she'd said in 3 days. Maylene followed her downstairs. The parlor had been cleared, a small space made in front of the fireplace. The preacher stood there with his book. Gideon stood to one side, his face unreadable. Gerald and Constance took their positions. Elena was nowhere to be seen, and Cade waited at the center of it all, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair combed back, his expression serious but not cold. When Maylene entered, his eyes met hers, and again she felt that connection, that sense of being seen, being known. She walked toward him on legs that felt unsteady. No one gave her away. No one held her hand or whispered encouragement. She crossed the room alone, as she'd done everything else in this house. When she reached Cade's side, he offered his hand. She took it. His grip was warm, steady, real. The preacher began speaking, his voice droning through familiar words about duty and honor and cleaving together. Maylene barely heard him. Her attention was focused on Cade's hand holding hers, on the reality of what was happening, on the fact that in a few moments she would no longer be Maylene Hale, daughter of no one, belonging nowhere. She would be Maylene Ashford. The thought made her dizzy. "Do you, Cade Ashford, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was clear, certain, no hesitation. "Do you, Maylene Hale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it, the final moment, the last chance to refuse, to step back, to choose the familiar misery over the unknown risk. Maylene thought of 12 years of invisibility, of hands raw from lye soap and knees aching from scrubbing floors, of standing in corners while other people's lives unfolded around her, of being told again and again in 1,000 small ways that she didn't matter. She looked at Cade and saw a man who'd walked into this house and chosen her when he could have chosen comfort, acceptance, the easy path. "I do," she said. The preacher smiled thinly. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Cade leaned down, his hand gentle on her cheek, and kissed her. It was brief, chaste, appropriate for the witnesses watching. But Maylene felt it like lightning, like waking up, like the first breath after drowning. When he pulled back, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like relief. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Ashford," Gideon said. His tone was formal, correct, empty of warmth. But he extended his hand, and when Maylene took it, he didn't pull away. Gerald made the appropriate congratulations, his smile never reaching his eyes. Constance nodded stiffly. The preacher collected his fee and departed, and just like that it was done. Maylene was married. "We should go," Gideon said. "It's a long ride back to the ranch. We'll want to arrive before dark." Reality crashed down. Right. She was leaving, now, immediately. No time to say goodbye, to pack properly, to prepare. "I'll get my things," Maylene said. "I'll help," Cade offered. They climbed the stairs together, his presence large and unfamiliar in the narrow hallway. At her door, Maylene paused. "It's not much," she said. I live simply." He pushed the door open, looked at the small room with its narrow bed, single chair, and battered dresser. No rug, no decoration, no comfort. The room of someone who'd never been meant to matter. Something tightened in his jaw. "Get what you want to keep," he said quietly. "Whatever has value to you. Don't leave anything behind you'll regret." Maylene gathered her few possessions. The clothes fit in a single bag. The hairbrush, the wooden box with her mother's letter. That was everything. Her entire life, packed in minutes. As she tied the bag closed, the door creaked. Elena stood in the hallway, her face blotchy from crying, her eyes red and hard. "You must be very proud of yourself," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You've ruined everything. Everything we worked for. Everything I was promised." Maylene opened her mouth, closed it. What could she say? "I'm sorry?" That would be a lie. "I didn't mean for this to happen." That was true, but it wouldn't matter. "Elena," Cade said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your sister didn't choose this. I did." "Why?" Elena demanded, turning on him. "Why her? What does she have that I don't? I'm the one who was prepared. I'm the one who studied, who learned how to manage a household, how to entertain, how to be the kind of wife a man like you needs. She's just—" She gestured at Maylene helplessly. "She's nobody. She's not even really part of this family." "That's enough," Cade said, and though his voice didn't rise, there was steel in it. Elena flinched, then her face crumpled. "It's not fair," she whispered. "It's not fair." She turned and fled, disappearing into her room. The door slammed. Maylene stood frozen, Cade's words echoing in her mind. "I chose this. I chose her." But he hadn't answered Elena's question. Why? "Ready?" Cade asked, picking up her bag like it weighed nothing. No, she wasn't ready. Might never be ready. But she nodded anyway. They went downstairs. Gerald was waiting by the door, alone. Constance had disappeared. "Well," he said to Maylene, his voice cold, "I suppose this is farewell." It should have been a moment of emotion, a father saying goodbye to his daughter, but Gerald Hale had never been her father. Not really. He'd been her mother's husband, the man who'd given her shelter in exchange for labor. Nothing more. "Thank you," Maylene said anyway, "for taking care of me after my mother died." Something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or discomfort. Then it was gone. "Send word if there are any problems," he said to Cade, not Maylene. "I'm sure we can work something out." It was his final insult. Even now, he couldn't see her as a person, only as a potential liability. Cade's hand settled on the small of Maylene's back, warm and solid. "There won't be any problems," he said. "Goodbye, Mr. Hale." They walked out together into the afternoon light. 3 horses waited, 2 saddled, 1 packed with supplies. Gideon was already mounted, watching with that calculating expression that made Maylene's skin prickle. Cade tied her bag to the pack horse, then turned to her. "Have you ridden much?" "Some," Maylene answered. "When I was younger, before everything changed. Before her mother died and Gerald decided riding horses was above her station." "You'll ride with me," Cade said, "until we know what you're comfortable with." He swung into the saddle, then reached down. Maylene took his hand and let him pull her up. She settled in front of him, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. It was intimate in a way that made her breath catch, his chest against her back, his warmth surrounding her. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Gideon kicked his horse forward. Cade followed. And just like that, Maylene was riding away from the only home she'd known for 12 years, leaving behind a family that had never wanted her, heading toward a future that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she might lose her nerve, might ask Cade to stop, to let her down, to return her to the familiar misery because at least there she knew the rules. Instead, she looked forward, at the mountains growing larger on the horizon, at the vast Montana sky stretching endless and blue above them, at freedom, maybe, or maybe just a different kind of cage. Either way, she'd chosen it, and that made all the difference. The ride to the Ashford Ranch took 4 hours, and Maylene felt every minute of it in her spine, her thighs, the muscles of her back that weren't accustomed to holding herself upright on horseback for so long. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited contempt. Cade seemed to sense her discomfort anyway. After the first hour, he shifted slightly, adjusting his position to give her more support. "Lean back," he said quietly. "You'll tire yourself out sitting so rigid." She hesitated, then let herself settle against his chest. The intimacy of it still felt strange. This man was her husband, had every legal right to her body, her obedience, her life. But he held the reins with easy competence and said nothing more, just let her rest against the steady rhythm of his breathing. Gideon rode ahead, maintaining a distance that felt deliberate. He hadn't spoken since they left the Hale property, hadn't acknowledged Maylin's presence at all. She could feel his disapproval like cold wind against her skin. The landscape changed as they traveled west. The struggling farmland gave way to open range, vast stretches of grass dotted with cattle bearing the Ashford brand. The mountains drew closer, their peaks still holding snow despite the September warmth. Everything felt bigger out here, more raw, less forgiving. "We run about 5,000 head," Cade said, breaking the long silence. "Mostly Herefords, some Longhorns. The ranch covers 40,000 acres, though we don't own all of it outright. Some is leased from the territorial government." Maylene absorbed this information, trying to understand the scale of what he was describing. 40,000 acres. She couldn't imagine it. The Hale Ranch had been 300 acres, and most of that was scrubland barely fit for grazing. "It's a lot to manage," she said. "It is. We employ about 30 men year-round, more during roundup and branding. There's a bunkhouse, a foreman's cabin, the main house. My father built it all from nothing, starting with a land grant after he mustered out of the army." There was something in his tone, not quite pride, but not shame either. Complicated feelings about a complicated man. Maylene understood that. Her own feelings about Gerald Hale were a tangle she'd never fully sorted. "What does your father expect of me?" she asked. The question had been burning in her mind since the moment Cade chose her. "As your wife, what role am I supposed to fill?" Cade was quiet for a moment, his arms steady around her as the horse navigated a rocky stretch. "My father expects you to fail," he said finally. "He thinks I've made a mistake. He thinks you'll prove yourself unsuitable, and then he can pressure me to annul the marriage and choose someone more appropriate." The honesty was startling. Most men would have lied, would have offered reassurance and empty promises. But Cade was giving her the truth, harsh as it was. "Why did you choose me?" The question came out before she could stop it. Elena was right. She was prepared. She would have been easier. "Easier," Cade repeated. "Yes, she would have been easier." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've spent my whole life watching my father manipulate people. He's brilliant at it, finding what they want, what they fear, and using both to bend them to his will. Your sister walked into that parlor ready to be shaped into whatever she thought I wanted. I could see it in every word she said, every gesture she made. She'd been trained to be agreeable." Maylene felt Cade shift slightly, his breath warm against her hair. "But you," he continued, "you stood in that corner, expecting nothing, wanting nothing from me. You didn't perform, didn't try to make yourself into something you weren't. And when I asked you about Montana, you told me the truth instead of what you thought I wanted to hear. That's rare, especially in the world I come from. So you chose me because I wasn't trying to please you? I chose you because you're real. And because I saw how your family treated you, like you were less than them, less than human. That kind of cruelty." His voice hardened. "I know what it looks like. I've seen my father use it, and I decided I wouldn't leave you there." Maylene's throat tightened. It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't even particularly romantic, but it was honest, and it was more than anyone had offered her in 12 years. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Cade replied. "We have a long way to go before you'll know whether this was mercy or just a different kind of trap." The Ashford Ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. It was bigger than Maylene had imagined, a sprawling compound of buildings clustered in a valley, with corrals and barns and what looked like a small village of structures. The main house stood at the center, 2 stories of whitewashed wood and stone, commanding the landscape with quiet authority. As they rode closer, Maylene could see people moving between buildings, ranch hands finishing the day's work, someone carrying water from a well, smoke rising from what must be the cookhouse. It was a working operation, busy and alive, nothing like the desperate quietness of the Hale property. Gideon pulled his horse to a stop in front of the main house. A woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, sturdy and competent looking, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Mr. Ashford," she said, nodding to Gideon. Then her eyes found Cade, and her expression warmed slightly. "Welcome back," Martha, Cade said. He dismounted, then reached up to help Maylene down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, 4 hours of riding after years of minimal practice. She steadied herself, grateful for Cade's hand on her elbow. Martha's gaze traveled over Maylene, taking in the ivory wedding dress now dusty from travel, the Chinese features, the exhaustion that must be written across her face. Her expression gave nothing away. "This is my wife," Cade said. "Maylene Ashford. Maylene, this is Martha Boone. She manages the household." "Ma'am," Martha said, the word carefully neutral. "Martha," Maylene replied, inclining her head. "I'm pleased to meet you." "I'm sure you're tired from the journey," Martha continued, all brisk efficiency now. "I'll show you to your room. Mr. Cade, your father wants to see you in his study." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Cade hesitated, glancing at Maylene. "I'll come find you after," he said. "Make sure you're settled." Then he was gone, following Gideon into the house, and Maylene was left standing in the yard with Martha Boone's assessing gaze on her like a weight. "This way," Martha said. The inside of the house was beautiful in a rough, masculine way. Heavy furniture, dark wood, paintings of cattle, and landscape dominating the walls. Everything spoke of money, but also of function. This wasn't a house built to impress visitors with delicacy. It was built to last, to endure, to proclaim that the men who owned it had conquered the frontier and would not be moved. Martha led her up a wide staircase to the second floor. The hallway was lined with doors, most of them closed. At the end, Martha pushed open a door and stepped aside. "This is the main bedroom," she said. "It was Mrs. Ashford's, Cade's mother. She passed 8 years ago." The room was large, furnished with a substantial bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a small writing desk positioned near the window. The curtains were drawn back, letting in the last of the afternoon light. Everything was clean but impersonal, like a room waiting for someone to bring it to life. "There's water in the pitcher," Martha continued. "Supper's at 6 in the dining room. Mr. Ashford, the elder Mr. Ashford, expects punctuality. I'll send someone to help you change." "That's not necessary," Maylene said quickly. "I can manage." Martha's eyebrow lifted slightly. "As you wish. Supper at 6. She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Alone, Maylene sank onto the edge of the bed and let herself feel the weight of the day. Married, transported to a new home, surrounded by people who didn't want her here. It was overwhelming, and she was so tired her bones ached, but she couldn't afford to rest, couldn't afford to show weakness or need. She had less than 2 hours before supper, and she needed to make a decent impression. First impressions might be the only chance she got. She stood, unlaced the ivory dress with fingers that fumbled on the tiny buttons, and washed her face and hands in the basin. The water was cold, shocking her into alertness. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand looked pale, strained. She pinched her cheeks to bring color back, then braided her hair into a neat plait. The bag Kate had brought up sat on the chair. Maylene opened it, looking at her few possessions with new eyes. She had one other dress, dark blue cotton, slightly less worn than the gray. She put it on, smoothed the wrinkles as best she could, and tried to look like someone who belonged in this house. She failed. But there was nothing to be done about that now. At 6 o'clock exactly, she made her way downstairs. Voices carried from the dining room, male voices, discussing water rights and territorial politics. Maylene paused in the doorway, suddenly uncertain whether she should interrupt. Gideon sat at the head of the table, Cade to his right. 3 other men occupied chairs, ranch hands or foremen, she guessed, their faces weathered and their clothes clean but worn. They all turned to look at her when she appeared. "Ah," Gideon said. "Our new addition. Gentlemen, this is Cade's wife, Maylene. These are some of our senior hands. Thomas Beck, my foreman. James Riley, who manages the Southern Range. And Cal Morrison, who handles the books." The men nodded, their expressions ranging from curious to carefully blank. Maylene took the empty seat across from Cade, trying to ignore the weight of their attention. Martha appeared with platters of food, beef, potatoes, beans, fresh bread. It was simple fare, but abundant. Nothing like the carefully rationed meals at the Hale house. Maylene took small portions, hyper-aware of every movement she made. "So," Gideon said, his tone conversational but sharp underneath. "Tell us about yourself, Maylene, your family, your background." It was a test. She could hear it in the way he said her name, like he was tasting something foreign and finding it distasteful. My mother came from San Francisco, Maylene said, keeping her voice steady. She was a seamstress. She married Gerald Hale when I was young. After she passed, I stayed on to help with the household. Chinese, then, Gideon said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And your father? Your real father? The emphasis on real was deliberate. Maylene set down her fork carefully. I never knew him. My mother didn't speak of him. I see. Gideon cut into his beef with precise movements. And what skills do you bring to this household? What can you contribute? Father, Cade said, his voice low. A warning. It's a fair question, Gideon replied. The ranch is a business. Everyone here contributes. I'm simply asking what your wife can offer. Maylene met his eyes directly. I can cook, clean, mend, manage household accounts. I can work a garden, preserve food, make do with limited resources. I've been running a household since I was 14. I'm not afraid of hard work. Hard work, Gideon repeated. Yes, I imagine you've done plenty of that, but running a ranch household is different from scrubbing floors in a failing homestead. This isn't charity. We don't keep people who can't pull their weight. The insult was clear, the message clearer. Prove yourself or leave. I understand, Maylene said. I'll earn my place. Gideon smiled, thin and cold. We'll see. The meal continued in tense silence, broken only by occasional comments about ranch business. The men spoke around Maylene, not to her, as if she weren't there. She ate methodically, tasting nothing, focused on getting through the meal without incident. When it finally ended, the men dispersed, Thomas and James back to the bunkhouse, Cal to his cabin, Gideon to his study. Cade lingered, waiting until they were alone. I'm sorry, he said quietly. My father can be cruel, Maylene supplied. I noticed. I was going to say difficult, but yes, cruel fits. They stood in the empty dining room, the space between them full of things unsaid. Finally, Cade spoke again. I should show you the rest of the house. Help you get your bearings. He led her through the main floor. The parlor, the library filled with leather-bound books, Gideon's study with its locked door, the kitchen where Martha was directing two younger women in cleaning up. They looked at Maylene with frank curiosity but said nothing. Back upstairs, Cade paused outside the bedroom door. This is where you'll sleep, he said. I use the room next door. I thought, given that we barely know each other, you might prefer privacy. Maylene looked at him, surprised. Most men would have claimed their marital rights immediately, especially after being questioned and doubted the way Gideon had challenged him. But Cade was offering her space, time, choice. Thank you, she said. He nodded. If you need anything, I'm right next door. And Maylene, he hesitated. Don't let my father intimidate you. He tests everyone. It's how he maintains control. But you don't have to pass his test to belong here. You're my wife. That's enough. She wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the way Gideon looked at her, heard the dismissal in his voice. Being Cade's wife might be enough legally, but it wouldn't be enough to earn respect. That she'd have to win herself. Good night, Cade, she said. Good night. He disappeared into the next room. Maylene entered her own, closed the door, and leaned against it, feeling the exhaustion crash over her like a wave. Married. In a strange house, surrounded by hostile strangers. It was too much. All of it was too much. But she couldn't afford to break down. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She undressed, put on the thin nightgown that had been her mother's, and climbed into the large bed that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in years. The room was quiet, private, hers, and she'd never felt more alone. The next morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Someone knocked on Maylene's door before dawn, Martha's voice, sharp and businesslike, calling that breakfast would be ready in 30 minutes and she was expected to help. Maylene dressed quickly, braided her hair, and hurried downstairs to find Martha already working in the kitchen alongside the two younger women from the night before. You can start the biscuits, Martha said without preamble, gesturing to a bowl of flour. Louisa, show her where we keep the lard. The younger woman, barely 20 with red hair and freckles, pointed to a cupboard. There, You know how to make biscuits? Yes, Maylene said. She'd made thousands of them over the years, could do it half asleep. She worked quickly, cutting the lard into the flour, adding buttermilk until the dough came together, rolling it out and cutting rounds with practiced efficiency. Martha watched from the corner of her eye but said nothing. The other woman, older and quieter, was frying bacon. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and overwhelming. Maylene's stomach growled. She'd barely eaten at supper, too nervous to have an appetite. I'm Louisa, the red-haired woman said, clearly unable to contain her curiosity any longer. That's Anne. We help with the house and the cooking. Are you really from China? San Francisco, Maylene corrected gently. My mother was from China. I was born in America. Oh, Louisa looked disappointed. I've never met anyone from China or San Francisco. What's it like? Loud, Maylene said, remembering the crowded streets, the press of bodies, the constant noise. Busy, different from here. I've never been anywhere but Montana, Louisa said. Must be exciting, seeing different places. Exciting, that was one word for it. Maylene slid the biscuits into the oven and started cracking eggs into a bowl for scrambling. Montana has its own appeal, she said diplomatically. Martha made a sound that might have been approval. Get those eggs cooking, she said to Maylene. Men'll be here in 10 minutes. The men arrived exactly on time, Gideon first, followed by Cade, then the foreman Thomas, and several ranch hands Maylene hadn't met yet. They filled the dining room with noise and boots and the smell of leather and horse and hard work. Maylene helped carry platters to the table, pouring coffee, clearing plates. The men ate with single-minded focus, discussing the day's work between bites. They needed to move cattle to the eastern pasture. The fence along the creek was down. Someone had spotted wolf tracks near the lambing pens. No one acknowledged Maylene directly, but she felt their awareness of her, the way conversations paused when she approached, resumed when she left. She was the subject they were all carefully not discussing. After breakfast, Martha set her to work washing dishes. Anne dried while Louisa swept the floor. It was familiar work, mindless, giving Maylene time to think. Mrs. Ashford, the last one, she was real particular about how things were done, Louisa said, apparently unable to tolerate silence. Head rules for everything. Martha keeps it up the same way. You'll want to learn quick or she'll have your hide. Louisa, Martha said sharply from across the room, less talking, more working. Louisa flushed but grinned at Maylene conspiratorially when Martha's back was turned. Maylene found herself almost smiling back. At least someone in this house didn't seem hostile. The morning passed in a blur of work, dishes, then laundry, then helping Martha prepare midday dinner for the hands who worked close enough to the house to come in. Maylene's hands, soft from 3 days of wedding preparation, quickly remembered their calluses. By noon, her back ached and her feet hurt, but she kept going. At dinner, Gideon appeared again, watching Maylene with that same calculating expression. I'm told you can keep books, he said abruptly. Is that true? Maylene set down the platter she'd been carrying. Yes, I managed the household accounts for the Hale Ranch. Show me. He stood, gestured for her to follow. In his study, he pulled out a ledger, opened it to a page of entries. These are supply purchases from last month. Tell me if they're accurate. Maylene scanned the columns, her mind automatically tallying figures. She found the error within minutes, a decimal point in the wrong place, making a purchase of salt look 10 times more expensive than it should be. Here, she said, pointing, this should be $2.40, not $24. Gideon's expression didn't change. And? She looked more carefully, found another mistake. This entry for horseshoes. You've counted them twice, once on the 5th, once on the 7th. But these serial numbers match. It's the same purchase. Anything else? She examined the page more thoroughly, found a third error in addition, pointed it out, waited. Gideon said finally. He closed the ledger. Cal has been getting sloppy, or perhaps testing whether anyone would notice. You have a good eye. It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. Progress, maybe. Maylene inclined her head. Thank you. Don't thank me. If you want to be useful, you can review the books properly. Find all the errors. Report to me by the end of the week. He dismissed her with a wave, already turning to other papers on his desk. Maylene returned to the kitchen where Martha was kneading bread with fierce concentration. "What did he want?" Martha asked. "To test my bookkeeping." "And?" "I found 3 errors." Martha's hands paused for just a moment, then resumed their work. "Cal won't like that. He's proud of his numbers." "I'm sorry," Maylene said automatically. "Don't be sorry. Be right. That's all that matters here, being right and being useful. You can't control whether they like you, but you can control whether they need you." Martha shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "You do well to remember that." It was the most direct advice anyone had given her since she arrived. Maylene absorbed it, filed it away with all the other observations she was collecting about how this household worked, where the power lay, who mattered and who didn't. The afternoon brought more work, helping Martha preserve late-season vegetables, mending shirts that ranch hands had brought in, sweeping floors that seemed to accumulate dust faster than she could clean them. By the time evening approached, Maylene was exhausted, every muscle screaming, but she'd made it through a full day, proved she could work. That counted for something. At supper, Cade appeared looking dusty and tired, his shirt stained with sweat and something that might have been blood. "We lost a steer to wolves," he said in response to his father's questioning look. "Found what was left near Copper Creek. Set some traps." "How many head have we lost this month?" Gideon asked. 7, that we know of. Unacceptable. Increase the patrols. I want those wolves dealt with." The conversation moved on to other ranch business. Maylene ate quietly, listening, learning. The ranch ran on a complex system of territories and responsibilities. Different men managing different sections, reporting to Thomas, who reported to Gideon. Cade seemed to operate slightly outside this hierarchy, answerable to his father, but given more autonomy than the others. After supper, Cade found Maylene in the kitchen helping with dishes. "Walk with me," he said. She dried her hands, followed him outside. The evening was cool, the sky turning deep blue as the sun set behind the mountains. Cade led her away from the house, toward a small rise that overlooked the valley. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Busy," Maylene said. "Your father had me review some ledgers, found errors." Cade smiled slightly. "I'm sure Cal was thrilled." "I haven't told him yet. Your father asked me to do a full review by the end of the week. He's testing you, seeing if you'll follow through, if you're competent." Cade looked out over the ranch, his profile sharp against the dimming sky. "He does this with everyone, gives them impossible tasks, watches them fail, uses it to maintain control." "What if I don't fail?" "Then he'll give you harder tasks until you do, or until he finds something else to use against you." Cade turned to face her. "I'm not telling you this to discourage you. I'm telling you so you know what you're dealing with. My father is brilliant and ruthless, and he doesn't believe you belong here. He will try to break you." Maylene looked at the ranch spread out below them, the house with its warm lights, the barns, the corrals, the vast expanse of land stretching toward darkness. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, exactly like the man who'd built it. "I won't break," she said quietly. Cade studied her for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I don't think you will." They stood in comfortable silence as full darkness fell. Then Cade spoke again, his voice careful. "I know this isn't what you expected. I know we're not, this isn't a normal marriage." "What marriage is normal?" Maylene asked. "People marry for land, for money, for family alliances. At least we're honest about it." "Are we?" Cade's eyes found hers in the darkness. "Because I haven't been entirely honest with you." Maylene's heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" "I told you I chose you because you were real. That's true. But it's not the whole truth." He took a breath. "My father has been pressuring me to marry for years. He has specific ideas about what kind of woman I should choose, someone from a wealthy family, someone who can bring political connections, someone who will reflect well on the Ashford name. He had a list of candidates, women he'd vetted and approved. And I wasn't on that list. You were as far from that list as possible, which is exactly why I chose you." Cade's jaw tightened. "I'm tired of being a piece in my father's games, tired of every decision being calculated for maximum advantage. When I walked into your house and saw you standing there, invisible and ignored, I saw a chance to make a choice that was mine. Not strategic, not approved, just mine. Maylene absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. So you chose me to spite your father. I chose you to claim my own life, Cade corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Maylene heard the bitterness in her own voice, couldn't quite suppress it. Either way, I'm a tool, a means to an end. You're my wife, Cade said firmly. That's not nothing. Isn't it? Maylene turned to face him fully. You gave me privacy, a separate room, respect, all things I appreciate. But we both know this isn't a real marriage. You don't love me. I don't love you. We're strangers bound by a contract that benefits you more than it benefits me. How do you figure that? You got a wife who makes your father angry. What did I get? A house full of people who wish I wasn't here. A father-in-law who tests me like I'm a horse he's considering purchasing. Work from dawn to dark trying to prove I deserve to exist. She laughed, sharp and humorless. At least at the Hale Ranch, I knew I was unwanted. Here, I have to pretend I don't know it. Cade was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You're right, this isn't fair to you. I made a decision that changed your entire life, and I did it for my own reasons. That's selfish. I've been selfish. The admission surprised her. Men didn't usually admit fault, especially not to women they'd married. But, Cade continued, I meant what I said. You're my wife. That means something to me, even if it doesn't to you yet. I will protect you. I will defend you. And I will make sure you have a place here, whether my father likes it or not. Why? Maylene asked. Why does it matter to you? Because I know what it's like to be trapped in someone else's design, Cade said. To have every part of your life planned out, decided, controlled. My father has been doing that to me since I was old enough to understand. And I won't do it to you. You're here because I chose you, yes, but you'll stay because you choose to stay. On your own terms. However long that takes. Maylene wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this man she barely knew actually meant what he said, that he saw her as something more than a piece in his rebellion against his father. But trust was earned, not given, and she'd learned that lesson too thoroughly to forget it now. I should get back, she said. It's late. They walked back to the house in silence. At the base of the stairs, Cade paused. Maylene, thank you. For what? For coming here, for trying, for not running away yet. His smile was crooked, self-deprecating. The night's still young, of course. You might still reconsider. Despite everything, Maylene felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. I'll let you know. In her room, she undressed slowly, her body aching from the day's work. Through the wall, she could hear Cade moving around in the next room, boots hitting the floor, the creak of furniture, the sounds of another person existing just feet away, yet utterly separate. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything he'd said, about choice and control and what it meant to claim your own life. She'd thought marriage to Cade was her escape from the Hale household, her chance at something better. But maybe it was just a different kind of cage, larger, more comfortable, but still bounded by other people's expectations and needs. The question was whether she could find a way to make it hers. To carve out space within these walls for the person she wanted to become, not just the person everyone expected her to be. She didn't have an answer yet, but lying there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home, Maylene made herself a promise. She would not disappear again. Whatever it took, however long it required, she would make herself matter. Not because Cade had chosen her, not because she needed to prove Gideon wrong, but because she deserved to exist as more than a shadow in someone else's story. That much at least she could control. The ledgers revealed their secrets slowly, like a body giving up evidence of old wounds. Maylene spent 3 days hunched over Cal Morrison's books, tracing numbers backward through months of entries, finding patterns in the discrepancies. Some were simple errors, transposed digits, decimal points in wrong places. Those she marked with pencil, neat annotations in the margins. But others were different. Deliberate. Someone had been skimming money from supply purchases, adding phantom expenses, inflating costs by small amounts that would be easy to miss unless you were looking carefully. $5 here, $10 there. Over 6 months, it added up to nearly $300, a fortune to most ranch hands. Pocket change to the Ashfords, which was probably why no one had noticed. Maylene sat back in the small office Gideon had grudgingly allowed her to use, rubbing her tired eyes. The lamp burned low. It was past midnight, the house silent around her. She should sleep, but the numbers pulled at her, insistent, demanding to be understood. The door opened without warning. Maylene's head snapped up, her heart jumping. Cade stood in the doorway, his hair mussed, wearing only trousers and an unbuttoned shirt. "It's late," he said. "I saw the light." "I'm nearly finished." Maylene gestured to the ledgers spread across the desk. "Your father wanted this done by the end of the week." Cade moved closer, looking at her work. His eyes sharpened when he saw her notations. "How much?" "In errors? About $40. In theft?" She paused. "Close to 300. "Theft." Cade's voice went flat. "You're certain?" "See for yourself." Maylene showed him the pattern she'd found. Supply purchases that didn't match inventory records, payments to vendors who didn't exist when cross-referenced with shipping manifests. Someone had been careful, but not careful enough. Cade studied the numbers, his jaw tightening. "Cal? I don't know, maybe. Or someone with access to the books who knows Cal won't check his own work thoroughly." Maylene hesitated. "Your father won't be pleased." "My father," Cade said, "will be furious, but not at you." He looked at her, something like respect in his eyes. "This is good work, Maylene. Thorough." The praise warmed her more than it should have. She turned back to the ledgers, uncomfortable with the feeling. "I should write up my findings. Make it clear what I found. Tomorrow. Tonight, you sleep." Cade reached past her, extinguishing the lamp. "Come on! You'll make yourself sick working like this." Maylene wanted to protest, but exhaustion dragged at her bones. She let Cade guide her out of the office, up the stairs, to her bedroom door. He paused there, his hand still on her elbow. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for doing this, for finding it. My father tests people, but he also trusts the wrong ones sometimes. Cal's been with the ranch for 15 years. Father would never have suspected him." "We don't know it's Cal," Maylene reminded him. "No, but we know it's someone." Cade's expression hardened. "And we'll find out who." The next morning, Maylene presented her findings to Gideon in his study. She'd written everything out neatly, organized by category: simple errors, questionable entries, probable theft. She laid the papers on his desk and stepped back, waiting. Gideon read in silence, his face giving nothing away. Minutes passed. Finally, he looked up. "Cal Morrison has worked for this ranch since before Cade was born," he said. "He's loyal, trustworthy." "The numbers don't lie," Maylene said quietly. "Numbers can be misinterpreted, especially by someone unfamiliar with how a ranch operates." Gideon's eyes were cold. "You've been here less than a week. You don't know how things work. I know how bookkeeping works, and someone has been stealing from you." "Or perhaps," Gideon said, his voice silky and dangerous, "someone is trying to make herself indispensable by creating problems that don't exist, proving her worth by inventing crises." The accusation hit like a slap. Maylene felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. "I have no reason to lie. You asked me to review the books. I did. If you don't want to hear what I found, that's your choice. But the theft is real." Gideon stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. He was a big man, and he used his size deliberately, crowding her space, making her feel small. "Let me be very clear, girl. I don't know what game you're playing, but I will not have you disrupting my operation with baseless accusations. Cal Morrison is worth 10 of you. If you think you can undermine him to secure your own position, Father." Cade's voice cut across the room like a knife. He stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "That's enough." "This is ranch business," Gideon said, not taking his eyes off Maylene. "It doesn't concern you. My wife concerns me, and you will not speak to her that way." The temperature in the room dropped. Maylene stood frozen, caught between two powerful men whose wills were suddenly locked in direct opposition. She could feel the weight of years between them, old arguments, old resentments, power struggles that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with control. "Your wife," Gideon said, turning the words into something ugly, "has accused a loyal employee of theft. Based on a week of looking at numbers she doesn't understand, that demands a response." "Then respond to the evidence, not to her." Cade moved into the room, picked up the papers Maylene had prepared. These are detailed, specific. Either they're accurate or they're not. Have someone else review them. Thomas, maybe. Or bring in an auditor from Helena. But don't stand there bullying her because you don't like what she found. Gideon's face darkened. You forget yourself. No, Father, I remember myself. For the first time in a long time. Cade's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Maylene did the work you asked her to do. If you don't want honest accounting, don't ask for it. The silence stretched thin and dangerous. Maylene held her breath, waiting for the explosion. But Gideon's control was absolute. He simply smiled, cold and sharp as a blade. Very well, he said. I'll have Thomas review her findings. We'll see what he discovers. He dismissed them with a gesture. You're both excused. Outside the study, Maylene's legs trembled with reaction. Cade took her elbow, steadying her. Are you all right? He thinks I'm lying. He thinks everyone's lying. It's how his mind works. Cade guided her toward the kitchen, where Martha was kneading bread with her usual fierce concentration. Martha, Maylene needs coffee. Martha took one look at Maylene's pale face and nodded, pouring a cup without comment. Maylene wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. What happened? Martha asked. Maylene found discrepancies in the books. Father accused her of inventing them to make herself important. Cade's jaw was tight. He's having Thomas review her work. Martha's hands stilled in the dough. Thomas is honest. If the numbers are wrong, he'll say so. And if they're right, then we have a thief. Martha resumed kneading, her movements deliberate. And Mr. Ashford will have to admit that the Chinese girl was right. The way she said it, matter of fact, without judgment, somehow made it worse. Because Martha wasn't being cruel. She was simply stating reality. Maylene would always be the Chinese girl to these people. Always the outsider. Always suspect. I'm going to check the southern fence, Cade said abruptly. Maylene, come with me. Maylene blinked. What? You've been inside for 3 days. You need air. Come on. Before she could protest, he was moving, leaving her to follow or be left behind. Maylene set down her coffee and hurried after him, ignoring Martha's knowing look. Outside, Cade was already saddling 2 horses, his big gelding and a smaller mare, Chestnut with a white blaze. This is Rosie, he said. She's gentle. Good for riders who are out of practice. I can't just leave, Maylene protested. There's work. The work will wait. And you need to learn the ranch if you're going to live here. Cade finished with Rosie's girth, checked the stirrups. Besides, if you stay in that house right now, you'll either scream or cry, and I'd rather you didn't have to do either where my father can see. He was right. The walls were closing in, Gideon's suspicion like smoke in her lungs. Maylene took the reins Cade offered, put her foot in the stirrup, and swung up. Her body protested. She was still sore from the ride to the ranch. But the motion was familiar, muscle memory from a childhood she'd almost forgotten. They rode out together, leaving the compound behind. The morning was clear and cool, the grass still wet with dew, the mountains sharp against a blue sky. Maylene breathed deeply, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. I'm sorry, Cade said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. About my father. He was worse than I expected. You warned me he'd test me. Testing is one thing, that was something else. Cade's hands were tight on the reins. He does that when he's worried, attacks, undermines, makes you doubt yourself so you'll stop questioning him. Why is he worried? Because you found something he missed. Because you're competent and he didn't expect that. Because every day you prove yourself useful, you become harder to get rid of. Cade glanced at her. He wanted you to fail, to prove I'd made a mistake marrying you, but you're not failing. Not yet, Maylene said. Give it time. You don't give yourself enough credit. I give myself exactly as much credit as I've earned. Maylene urged Rosie into a trot, feeling the rhythm of the horse's movement, the stretch in her thighs. Your father's right about one thing. I've been here less than a week. I don't know this ranch. Don't know the land or the people or how anything works. I'm guessing. Improvising. Hoping I don't make a mistake that costs you everything. Cade caught up to her easily, his gelding matching Rosie's pace. What do you mean, costs me everything? Your father's tolerance, the respect of the men, your position here. Maylene looked at him directly. You chose me to claim your independence. But every time you defend me, every time you stand against your father because of me, you pay a price. Eventually, the cost might be more than you're willing to bear. That's not how this works, Cade said. Isn't it? We barely know each other, Cade. We're married, but we're strangers. How long before you start resenting me for the complications I've brought into your life? Cade pulled his horse to a stop. Maylene stopped as well, watching him. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. When I was 12, he said, my mother got sick. Some kind of wasting disease the doctor couldn't diagnose or treat. She spent 2 years dying slowly while my father threw money at specialists who couldn't help her. And you know what he did during those 2 years? He worked, expanded the ranch, made deals, built his empire. Because sitting with her, watching her fade, that wasn't productive. That didn't serve his goals. Maylin's throat tightened. She said nothing, just listened. She died alone, Cade continued, his voice rough. In the middle of the night, my father was in Helena negotiating water rights. I was asleep. She just slipped away. And when I found her in the morning, cold and still, all I could think was that she'd spent her whole life making herself small enough to fit into my father's world. And it killed her. He looked out at the mountains, his jaw tight. I swore I'd never do that. Never let anyone I cared about disappear because it was convenient. So no, Mayleen, I don't resent defending you. I resent that you need defending in the first place. But as long as you do, I will. Because the alternative is becoming my father, and I'd rather die. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Mayleen felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something. Trust, maybe, or just recognition. The acknowledgement that Cade saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else had bothered to. Thank you, she said quietly. Cade nodded once, sharp, then urged his horse forward. Come on, I want to show you something. They rode for another hour, climbing into the foothills, following a trail that wound between pine trees and over rocky outcroppings. The air grew thinner, cooler, scented with pine and sage. Finally, Cade stopped at a clearing that overlooked the entire valley. From here, Maylin could see the ranch compound, small in the distance, the checkerboard of pastures, the ribbon of river cutting through it all. This is the highest point on Ashford land, Cade said. My mother used to come here when she needed to think. She said it helped her remember the ranch wasn't the whole world, that there was more beyond it. Maylene dismounted, her legs stiff, and walked to the edge of the clearing. The view was breathtaking, vast and wild and indifferent to human struggle. She understood why Cade's mother had come here. It put things in perspective, made the problems that felt overwhelming seem smaller, more manageable. Do you come here often? She asked. Not as often as I should. Cade joined her at the edge, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. But I wanted you to see it, to know it exists, for when you need escape without leaving. Is that what you do? Escape without leaving? Every day? His smile was crooked, self-aware. It's the only way to survive in that house. They stood in comfortable silence, watching clouds move across the sky, casting shadows on the valley below. Maylene felt something in her relax that had been tight since the moment Cade chose her. This was the first time she'd felt like she could breathe, could think, could just exist without performing or defending or trying to prove her worth. We should go back, Cade said eventually. Thomas will have reviewed your numbers by now. The knot in Maylene's stomach returned. Right. The real world was waiting, with its tests and suspicions and consequences. But at least now she'd seen this place, knew it existed. That counted for something. The ride back felt shorter. By the time they reached the compound, the sun was high and hot, burning off the morning cool. Thomas was waiting by the main house, his weathered face unreadable. Cade, he said, nodding. Then, to Maylene, Ma'am, Mr. Ashford wants to see you both in his study. They dismounted. A ranch hand appeared to take the horses. Maylene smoothed her skirt, tried to calm her racing heart, and followed Cade inside. Gideon sat behind his desk, Thomas standing to one side, Cal Morrison on the other. Cal was a lean man in his 50s, with thinning hair and nervous hands that wouldn't stay still. He looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. Well, Gideon said as they entered, It seems we have a problem. Sir, Cal started. Be quiet. Gideon's voice cracked like a whip. He looked at Maylene, and there was something new in his expression. Not warmth, never that, but acknowledgement. Thomas has reviewed your findings. They're accurate. Every single discrepancy you noted exists exactly as you documented. Maylene let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Cal has admitted to taking money from supply accounts over the past 8 months, Gideon continued. He claims it was to cover gambling debts, that he intended to pay it back. I did intend to pay it back, Cal said desperately. I swear, Mr. Ashford, I wasn't trying to steal. I just needed time. You stole from me, Gideon said flatly. Intent doesn't change that. Get your things. You have an hour to be off my land. Cal's face crumpled. Please. I've been here 15 years. I've got nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before you put your hand in my pocket. Gideon's expression was carved from ice. If you're still here in an hour, I'll have you arrested. Thomas, escort him out. Thomas took Cal's arm, not ungently, and guided him from the room. Cal was crying now, begging, but Gideon had already dismissed him from his attention. He looked at Maylene instead. You were right, he said. I owe you an apology. The words seemed to cost him. Maylene inclined her head, accepting. Thank you. Don't thank me. You did good work. Work I should have had someone doing months ago. Gideon stood, moved to the window, looked out at his empire. Cal was lazy, sloppy. I kept him on too long out of misplaced loyalty. That was my mistake. What will you do now? Kate asked. You need someone to manage the books. I'm aware. Gideon turned back, his eyes on Maylene. You'll take the position, full accounting, supply management, payroll. I'll expect weekly reports. Maylene blinked. Sir, I've only been here a week. And in that week, you've proven yourself more competent than a man I trusted for 15 years. You'll do the work. You'll do it well. And you'll be compensated fairly. Gideon named a salary that made Maylene's breath catch. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having for herself. Father, Kate said carefully. That's generous. It's business, Gideon corrected. I pay for competence. She's competent. Therefore, I pay her. He looked at Maylene. Well, do you accept? Yes, Maylene said, finding her voice. Yes, I accept. Good. You start tomorrow. Cal's office is yours. Make whatever changes you need. Gideon sat back down, already turning to other papers. Now get out, both of you. I have work to do. Outside, Cade grabbed Maylene's shoulders, his face split by a genuine smile. Do you understand what just happened? Your father gave me a job. My father admitted he was wrong, in front of witnesses, and gave you authority over ranch finances. Maylene, he never does that, never admits error, never gives power to anyone he doesn't absolutely trust. He doesn't trust me, Maylene said. He just needs me. There's a difference. Maybe, but it's a start. Cade was still smiling, his eyes bright. You did it. You proved yourself, on your own terms. Maylene wanted to feel the triumph of it, the vindication. But all she felt was tired and wary, and aware that she'd just accepted a position that would make her even more of a target. Cal had been fired. Someone else would resent her for it. Someone else would see her as the outsider who'd disrupted their comfortable arrangements. But she'd also earned something real, a position, a salary. Respect, even if grudging, that was worth the risk. Come on, Cade said. Let's tell Martha. She'll be insufferable about being right. He was correct. Martha's only response to the news was a satisfied, and a comment that anyone with eyes could see Maylene had a head for numbers. But Louisa was thrilled, chattering excitedly about how romantic it was that Maylene had uncovered a thief like a detective in a dime novel. It wasn't romantic, Maylene protested. It was just bookkeeping. But you saved the ranch money. You caught a bad man. That's exciting. Anne, quieter as always, just smiled. You'll be good at it, she said. Better than Cal ever was. That evening, Maylene stood in Cal's former office, her office now, looking at the desk, the ledgers, the lamp that would burn while she worked late into the night. It was small, cramped, nothing grand. But it was hers. a space she'd earned through competence, not given as charity or claimed through marriage. She ran her hand over the desk, feeling the worn wood, and let herself feel it finally. Pride. She'd done this. In less than a week in a hostile house, she'd proven herself valuable, essential, even. It wasn't love, it wasn't family, it wasn't belonging, not really, but it was a start. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work. Maylene threw herself into the ranch accounts with fierce concentration, learning the rhythms of the operation, who supplied what, when payments were due, how to track inventory across 40,000 acres. She worked from dawn until midnight most days, eating meals at her desk, falling into bed exhausted. The ranch hands began to accept her presence, if not welcome it. They brought their supply requests to her office, learned that she was fair but thorough, that she caught mistakes but didn't make them feel stupid for making them. Thomas started consulting her about purchases, trusting her judgment on prices and vendors. Even Gideon, in his way, showed approval. He stopped testing her, started expecting her reports, reading them carefully, occasionally nodding at decisions she'd made. It wasn't warmth, but it was acknowledgement. Cade watched all of this with something like amazement. "You're thriving," he said one evening, finding her in the office long after everyone else had gone to bed. "I've never seen someone adapt this quickly." "I'm not adapting," Maylene said, not looking up from the ledger she was balancing. "I'm surviving. There's a difference." "Is there?" She set down her pen, finally meeting his eyes. "Adapting suggests I'm becoming part of this place. Surviving means I'm finding ways to exist here without disappearing. Those aren't the same thing." Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled up a chair, sat across from her. "Tell me something. Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that. Happiness was never a consideration, never something she was supposed to want or expect. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm busy, useful, less afraid than I was." "Is that happiness?" "I don't know either." Cade's smile was rueful. "I've never been very good at recognizing it myself." They sat in comfortable silence, the lamp burning between them. Outside, a coyote called, lonely and wild. Inside, surrounded by numbers and ledgers and the evidence of work well done, Maylene felt something she couldn't quite name. Not happiness, maybe, but close enough that it gave her hope. Then the door banged open. Thomas stood there, his face grim, his shirt torn and bloodied. "Cade," he said, "we've got trouble. Big trouble." Cade was on his feet instantly, his chair scraping back. "What happened?" "Riders hit the Eastern Line camp about an hour ago, burned it. Frank's dead, 2 others wounded." Thomas's voice was steady despite the blood on his shirt. "They left a message, said they're coming for the water rights, said Ashford's time is over." Maylene felt the air leave the room. Cade's face went hard as stone. "How many riders?" 6, maybe 8, hard to tell in the dark. They knew what they were doing, hit fast, burned everything, disappeared into the hills. Thomas looked at Maylene briefly, then back to Cade. "Your father needs to hear this." "He already knows," Gideon's voice came from behind Thomas. He stood in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour, his face carved with cold fury. "I heard the commotion. Get every man armed and ready. I want patrols on every section by dawn." "Sir, the men are exhausted. I don't care if they're dead on their feet. Someone just killed one of our own and burned our property. We respond now or we look weak." Gideon's eyes found Cade. "You'll lead the Southern Patrol. Take 6 men. I want reports every 2 hours." "What about the wounded?" Cade asked. "Martha's tending them in the bunkhouse. They'll live." Gideon turned to go, then paused. "And Maylene, you'll stay in the house. Lock your door. This doesn't concern you." He was gone before she could respond. Thomas followed, already calling orders to men Maylene could hear stirring in the bunkhouse. Within minutes, the compound was alive with movement, boots, voices, the metallic click of rifles being loaded. Cade grabbed his gun belt from the hook by the door, buckled it with practiced efficiency. "He's right. Stay inside. Keep away from the windows." "Who would do this?" Maylene asked. "Why?" "Water rights." Cade checked his rifle, his movements automatic. "There's a group of ranchers north of here who claim my father stole access to Copper Creek 20 years ago. They've been fighting it in court, but the territorial judge keeps ruling in our favor. Guess they decided to take matters into their own hands. This is about water? Everything in Montana is about water. Land without water is worthless. My father controls most of the Good Creek access in this valley. That makes him powerful and hated. Cade moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. He crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her. Quick, hard, desperate. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Martha. Then he was gone, leaving Maylene standing alone in the office with her heart pounding and the taste of him still on her lips. She stood frozen for a long moment, listening to men shouting, horses being saddled, the organized chaos of a ranch preparing for war. Then she moved, closing the office, checking windows, making her way through the darkened house. Martha was in the kitchen, boiling water, tearing sheets into bandages. 2 men with bullet wounds, 1 with burns, Martha said without looking up. Help me carry these to the bunkhouse. Gideon said to stay inside. Gideon can go to hell. I need help and you've got hands. Come on. Maylene grabbed a stack of bandages and followed Martha into the night. The bunkhouse was chaos. Wounded men on cots, others gathered around talking in low, angry voices. The smell hit her first. Blood, burned flesh, fear sweat. 1 man was unconscious, his chest wrapped in makeshift bandages already soaking through. Another sat upright, his arm burned raw, his face gray with pain. Whiskey, Martha ordered, pointing Maylene toward a cabinet. And clean water. Move. The next hour passed in a blur. Maylene held men down while Martha cleaned wounds, poured alcohol on burns, stitched torn flesh. The men screamed or bit leather or passed out, but Martha's hands never wavered. She worked with brutal efficiency, and Maylene matched her pace, learning as she went, pushing down her own horror at the damage human bodies could sustain. You've done this before, Maylene said, as Martha tied off a final suture. Frontier life? You learn or you watch people die. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, already ruined with blood. You did good. Didn't faint, didn't panic. That's more than most. From outside came the sound of riders leaving, Cade's patrol heading south. Maylene moved to the door, watched them disappear into darkness. 6 men on horseback, armed, riding toward people who'd already killed once tonight. Her stomach twisted. He'll be fine, Martha said, reading her expression. Cade knows this land better than anyone, and he's smart enough not to do anything stupid. His father isn't. Martha's mouth tightened. No. Gideon's smart enough to do very stupid things if he thinks they'll send the right message. Come on. We need to prepare for casualties. Back in the house, they set up the dining room as a makeshift hospital. Tables cleared, sheets spread, medical supplies organized. Martha moved with the competence of someone who'd done this too many times before. Maylene followed her lead, trying not to think about Cade riding into danger, trying not to imagine him coming back wounded or not coming back at all. How often does this happen? She asked. Skirmishes over water? Every few years? Usually they're settled in court or through negotiation, but sometimes, Martha gestured at the preparations around them. Sometimes men decide violence is faster than law. And Gideon? What will he do? Whatever he thinks will win. Martha met her eyes. Gideon Ashford doesn't believe in half measures. If he thinks burning their ranches will end this, he'll burn them. If he thinks killing their leaders will work, he'll kill them. He built this empire by being more ruthless than everyone else. He's not going to stop now. The words settled in Maylene's stomach like stones. She'd known Gideon was hard, calculating, willing to do whatever served his interests. But this was different. This was war, and she was trapped in the middle of it, married to his son, living in his house, keeping his books. You should rest, Martha said. Could be hours before anyone comes back. Could be days. But Maylene couldn't rest. She returned to her office, to the ledgers that suddenly seemed trivial in the face of men dying over creek access. She tried to work, to lose herself in numbers, but her mind kept circling back to Cade riding into darkness, to Thomas's bloodied shirt, to the man in the bunkhouse who might not see morning. Dawn came gray and cold. Maylene had fallen asleep at her desk, woke with her cheek pressed to an account book, her neck stiff and aching. She could hear movement in the house, Martha starting breakfast, men's voices low and tense. She washed her face, changed her dress, went downstairs. The dining room was still set up as a hospital, empty for now. In the kitchen, Martha was frying eggs with mechanical efficiency. Any word? Maylene asked. Thomas sent a rider back an hour ago. They found tracks heading north toward the Peterson ranch. Gideon's taken men to confront them. And Cade? With him. Martha cracked another egg, her face carefully neutral. Eat something. You look like death. Maylene forced down toast and coffee, tasting nothing. The day stretched ahead, empty and terrible. She tried to work, but the numbers swam on the page, meaningless. Finally, she gave up and went to help Martha with the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Bread to bake, laundry to wash, meals to prepare for men who might not come back to eat them. Louisa appeared mid-morning, her eyes red from crying. Is it true? Frank's really dead? Yes, Martha said bluntly. Burned in the line camp. But we were... Louisa's voice broke. She pressed her hands to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Martha's expression softened slightly. I know, girl. I'm sorry. Maylene hadn't known, hadn't realized Frank and Louisa were courting, hadn't paid attention to anything beyond her ledgers and her desperate need to prove her worth. She put her arm around Louisa's shoulders, felt the younger woman collapse against her, sobbing. It's not fair, Louisa gasped. It's not fair. He was going to... I know, Maylene murmured, holding her. I know. They stood like that while Martha worked around them, while the morning passed with agonizing slowness. While somewhere out there men were deciding who would live and who would die over water that fell from the sky and belonged to everyone and no one. The riders returned just before noon. Maylene heard them coming, too many horses, moving too fast. She ran outside with Martha and Louisa, her heart in her throat. Cade was in front, his face grim, his shirt torn. Behind him came 6 other riders, and between them, on horses with their hands bound, 4 men Maylene didn't recognize. Prisoners. Gideon rode beside them, his expression carved from ice. Put them in the barn, he ordered. Under guard. No one talks to them without my permission. The prisoners were dragged from their horses. One was bleeding from a head wound, another limping badly. They looked exhausted, defiant, scared. Thomas and 2 other hands marched them toward the barn while the rest of the men dismounted. Maylene's eyes found Cade. He swung down from his horse, moving stiffly. When he saw her, something in his face eased slightly. You're hurt, she said, seeing blood on his sleeve. Grazed. It's nothing. He glanced toward the barn, his jaw tight. We found them at the Peterson place. They were planning another raid for tonight. He stopped, shook his head. Let's get inside. In the kitchen, Martha cleaned his wound with the same brutal efficiency she'd used on the others. It was shallow, a bullet that had torn through the meat of his upper arm without hitting bone. He didn't flinch as she poured alcohol on it, didn't make a sound. What happened? Maylene asked quietly. We rode to Peterson's ranch, found these 4 men and evidence they were behind last night's attack. Kerosene cans, maps of our line camps, Frank's pocket watch. Cade's voice was flat, emotionless. Peterson himself wasn't there. Claimed he knew nothing about it, that these men were acting on their own. We brought them back for questioning. Questioning, Martha repeated, her tone making clear what that word really meant. My father wants answers. He'll get them. Cade stood, testing his bandaged arm. Thank you, Martha. You should rest, Maylene said. Can't. Father wants everyone in his study in 10 minutes. Cade looked at her, including you. Me? Why? Because this involves the ranch, and you're part of the ranch now. His hand found hers, squeezed briefly. Come on. Gideon's study was crowded. Thomas, 2 other senior hands, Cade, and now Maylene. Gideon stood behind his desk like a general addressing his troops. We have 4 men who participated in an attack that killed one of ours and destroyed ranch property, he said without preamble. Peterson claims ignorance, but I don't believe him. This was coordinated, planned. They knew exactly where to hit us. What do you want to do? Thomas asked. I want justice. I want them to pay. And I want every rancher in this valley to know what happens when you come at the Ashfords. Gideon's eyes were cold. We'll hold them until the territorial marshal arrives. Let the law handle it. But in the meantime, I want to know everything. Who planned it? Who funded it? Who else is involved? And if they don't talk? One of the hands asked. They'll talk. Gideon's smile was terrible. I'll make sure of it. Maylene felt ice slide down her spine. She'd heard stories about frontier justice, about what men did to each other when law was distant and revenge was close. She'd never thought she'd be part of it. "Father," Cade said carefully, "if we torture them—" "Who said anything about torture?" Gideon's voice was mild. "I simply plan to make them uncomfortable until they decide cooperation is in their best interest. That's not torture. That's negotiation." The distinction was meaningless, and everyone in the room knew it. But no one challenged him. These men worked for Gideon, owed him their livelihoods, their homes. They would do what he asked or find themselves looking for work in a territory where the Ashford name carried weight. "Maylene," Gideon said, turning his attention to her, "you'll document everything, names, statements, evidence. I want a complete record when the marshal arrives." "Sir, I don't know how—" "You can write. You can organize information. That's all I need." He pulled out a ledger, clean and empty. "Start now. Interview the men we brought back. Get their stories on paper before they have time to coordinate lies." It was a test. Another one. But this time, Maylene understood what was really being asked. Would she be complicit in whatever Gideon planned to do? Would she make herself useful enough that she couldn't object without losing her position? She looked at Cade. He met her eyes, and she saw the conflict there. He didn't want this either. Didn't want her involved, but he also couldn't protect her without undermining his father in front of the men. "I'll do it," Maylene said quietly. Gideon nodded, satisfied. "Thomas, have the first prisoner brought to the barn office. Make sure he understands cooperation is his best option." The meeting dispersed. Maylene followed Thomas across the yard, clutching the empty ledger, her stomach churning. Inside the barn, the office was small, hot, smelling of hay and horse and fear. A chair sat in the center, rope marks on the arms where previous occupants had been restrained. The first prisoner was brought in, the one with the head wound, dried blood crusting his temple. He was perhaps 40, weathered and hard, his eyes defiant despite the fear Maylene could see underneath. "Sit," Thomas ordered. The man sat. Thomas tied his hands to the chair arms, not brutally, but firmly. Then he looked at Maylene. "He's all yours. Call if you need anything." He left, closing the door. Maylene stood alone with a man who'd helped kill Frank, who'd burned the line camp, who'd come to destroy everything the Ashfords had built. Her hands trembled as she opened the ledger. "Name?" she asked. The man spat on the floor. "Go to hell, China girl." Maylene kept her voice steady. "The territorial marshal is coming. You can tell your story to me now, or you can tell it to him later. But Mr. Ashford wants answers, and he'll get them one way or another. Cooperation might mean the difference between prison and a rope. Ashford can hang me himself. Won't change what's coming." The man's eyes were hard. "This land was promised to us. Water rights that were ours by law until your husband's father stole them with dirty judges and bought politicians. We got families. Children who go thirsty while Ashford cattle drink their fill. You think we're the criminals? Look at who you married." The words hit harder than Maylene expected. She thought of the ledgers, the careful accounting of water access, the legal documents she'd reviewed. She'd seen the claims, the counterclaims, the years of litigation. But she'd never asked the fundamental question, was Gideon right? "Tell me what happened," she said quietly. "Start from the beginning." Maybe it was her tone, maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the man just needed someone to hear his grievance, to acknowledge that he wasn't just a criminal, but a person with reasons. Whatever the cause, he started talking. His name was Samuel Garrett. He'd ranched north of the Ashford property for 15 years, raised 3 children, buried a wife. 5 years ago, Gideon had diverted Copper Creek through a series of legal maneuvers that Garrett claimed were fraudulent. Forged documents, testimony from witnesses who'd been paid, a judge who'd received generous campaign contributions from Ashford interests. "We tried the courts," Garrett said, his voice rough. "Spent every dollar we had on lawyers who told us the system was fair, that justice would prevail. But Ashford owns the system, owns the judges, the politicians, the law itself. So yeah, we burned his line camp. Yeah, we killed his man. Because when the law won't protect you, what else is there?" Maylene wrote it all down, her hands steady even as her mind reeled. She interviewed the other 3 prisoners over the next hours, heard variations of the same story: desperation, perceived injustice, violence as a last resort. They all admitted to the attack. None showed remorse. They believed they were in the right. By the time she finished, the sun was setting and her head ached with the weight of what she'd learned. She carried the ledger back to Gideon's study, found him reading correspondence by lamplight. "Well?" he said. Maylene set the ledger on his desk. "They've all admitted to the attack. They claim you stole water rights that belonged to them through fraudulent legal processes." "They claim." Gideon's voice was flat. "And you? What do you think?" It was another test, the most important one yet. Maylene thought carefully before answering. "I think they believe what they're saying. I think they're desperate. And I think desperation makes people dangerous," she paused. "But I also think the law is on your side. Whether it should be is a different question." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "I've seen the documents. The water rights transfers are legal by territorial law. But the men who wrote those laws were the same men who benefited from them. Wealthy ranchers who got here first and made rules that protected their interests. Legal doesn't always mean just." "Justice," Gideon said, "is a luxury for people who can afford it. Out here, survival is what matters. I secured water rights for this ranch because without water, we die. Those men want what I have because they failed to get it themselves. That's not injustice. That's competition." "Is it? Or is it theft dressed up in legal language?" Maylene surprised herself with her boldness. "You asked what I think. I think you won because you were smarter and more ruthless than they were. But that doesn't make you right. It just makes you powerful." The silence that followed was dangerous. Cade had appeared in the doorway, was watching with tension written in every line of his body. Thomas stood behind him, hand near his gun. Then Gideon laughed. It was a harsh sound, without humor but not hostile. "You're honest," he said. "Brutally so. Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what you actually think. That's either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both," Maylene said. "Maybe." Gideon stood, moved to the window, looked out at the compound. "Those men will hang. The law I used to take the water rights is the same law that will execute them for murder. That's how power works. You make the rules, then you enforce them. They should have understood that before they started burning my property." "And if they're right," Maylene pressed, "if you did steal from them, then I stole well enough that it doesn't matter." Gideon turned back to her. "You're married to my son. You keep my books. You live under my roof and eat my food and spend money I earned by being more ruthless than the next man. You don't get to stand in my study and judge me for the methods I used to build what you now benefit from." He was right. Maylene felt the truth of it like a slap. She'd been here 3 weeks, had carved out a position for herself, had started to feel secure. And all of it, every bit of it, was built on the empire Gideon had constructed through means she was only beginning to understand. "You're right," she said quietly. "I apologize." "Don't apologize. Just remember who you're working for. And what that means?" Gideon gestured dismissal. "You can go. And send word to the marshal in Helena. Tell him we're holding 4 men for murder and arson. He can collect them when he's ready." Maylene left, her legs unsteady. In the hallway, Cade caught her arm. "Are you all right?" "No." She looked at him. "Cade, did your father steal those water rights?" Cade's face was unreadable. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters." Oh, why? Because you want to feel good about living here? Because you want to believe we're the heroes?" Cade's voice was gentle but firm. "My father built this ranch by being smarter and tougher than everyone else. Some of his methods were questionable, some were probably illegal. But this is frontier Montana. Everyone's hands are dirty. The only difference is who wins. And if the people we beat were in the right, then they should have fought harder." Cade's jaw tightened. "I know that sounds cruel. Maybe it is. But it's also true. This is how the world works out here. You adapt or you die." Maylene pulled her arm free. "I need to think." She walked away, hearing him call her name, not stopping. She needed air, needed space, needed to process the impossible position she'd found herself in. She'd married into this family thinking she was escaping oppression. But maybe she'd just traded one form of it for another. Instead of being Gerald Hale's unpaid servant, she was now complicit in Gideon Ashford's empire building. The night air was cold, sharp with the promise of coming winter. Maylene walked to the horse corrals, leaned against the fence, looked at the mountains dark against the stars. Somewhere out there were families who believed the Ashfords had stolen from them. Whether that belief was justified or not, it was real to them, real enough to kill for. And she was keeping the books that documented that theft, was making the system run more efficiently, was proving herself valuable to the very empire those desperate men were trying to tear down. Quite a mess, isn't it? Maylene turned. Martha stood a few feet away, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. I don't know what to do, Maylene admitted. You survive, same as the rest of us. Martha came to stand beside her. You think you're the first person to realize Gideon Ashford isn't a saint? You think we all work here because we love the man? We work here because he pays well and he's powerful enough to protect us from worse things than his ambition. That's not enough. Maybe not, but it's what we have. Martha's voice was not unkind. You want to make a difference? Want to change things? Then you stay. You gain influence. You wait for your moment. You don't do it by running away because you don't like what you've discovered. What moment? The one where you have enough power to actually matter, where people listen when you speak, where your opinion changes outcomes. Martha looked at her steadily. You've been here 3 weeks and you already manage the ranch finances. Gideon trusts your judgment enough to have you document evidence against those men. You're married to his son. Give it time. And you might actually be able to change things around here. But only if you stay. Maylene wanted to reject the logic, wanted to believe she could simply walk away from complicity. But where would she go? Back to the Hale household that had treated her like property? Out into the territory alone with no money, no protection, no options? How do you live with it? She asked, knowing what he's done. I live with it by remembering that every powerful man in this territory has done similar things, or worse. I live with it by doing my job well and protecting the people in this household as best I can. I live with it by choosing my battles and waiting for my chances. Martha's hand settled briefly on Maylene's shoulder. You're not responsible for everything Gideon's done, but you are responsible for what you do next. Choose wisely. She walked back toward the house, leaving Maylene alone with the darkness and the weight of impossible choices. Maylene stood there for a long time, thinking about water rights and desperate men and the distance between legal and just, thinking about the position she'd fought so hard to earn and what it would cost her to keep it, thinking about Cade riding into danger, about Frank burning in a line camp, about families watching their children go thirsty while Ashford cattle drank deep. Finally, she made her decision. She would stay. Not because she approved of Gideon's methods, not because she believed the Ashfords were righteous, but because Martha was right. She had more power here than she'd ever had anywhere else. And power, however small, meant the possibility of change. But she would also start digging, would look more carefully at those water rights documents, would understand exactly what Gideon had done and how. Because if she was going to be complicit in his empire, she needed to know the full truth of what she was supporting. And someday, when the moment Martha spoke of arrived, she would be ready to use what she'd learned. The question was whether that moment would come before her conscience broke under the weight of what she'd have to do to survive until then. The digging started the next morning. While the ranch buzzed with tension, armed patrols whispered conversations about the prisoners in the barn, preparations for the marshal's arrival. Maylene locked herself in her office and began pulling every document related to water rights she could find. The files went back 23 years, to when Gideon first claimed land in the territory. The early documents were straightforward: homestead applications, territorial grants, legitimate purchases from families moving east. But around year 7, things changed. The acquisitions became more complex, the paperwork more elaborate, the legal language more deliberately obscure. Maylene traced it methodically. A claim filed by a man named Peterson, the same Peterson whose ranch they'd raided, rejected on a technicality about survey markers. Those same markers then used by Gideon to extend his own boundaries. A water rights transfer from the territorial government signed by an official who'd left office 3 months before the document's date. Witness testimony from men who'd later appeared on the Ashford payroll. It was brilliant, really. Each individual action was defensible, explainable, just barely legal. But taken together, the pattern was clear. Gideon had systematically used every loophole, every technicality, every corrupt connection to consolidate control of water access. He hadn't stolen outright. He'd manipulated the system so thoroughly that theft became legal. Find anything interesting? Maylene looked up to find Cade in the doorway, his arm still bandaged, exhaustion written in the lines around his eyes. Your father's brilliant, she said quietly, and completely ruthless. Cade closed the door, came to look at the document spread across her desk. You went looking. I had to know. Maylene gestured at the files. Those men in the barn, they're not wrong about what happened. Your father did steal from them. He just did it legally. I know. Cade sat heavily in the chair across from her. I've known for years. Why do you think I wanted nothing to do with ranch management? Why I spent most of my 20s trying to leave? But you came back. My mother was dying, she asked me to, said someone needed to balance my father's worst impulses. Cade's laugh was bitter. Didn't work. He just got better at hiding things from me. Maylene studied him. This man she'd married, who'd chosen her for reasons she was only beginning to understand. What do you want to do about it? What can we do? The law's on his side. Those men will hang for murder even though they were defending something that should have been theirs. And will go on running this ranch, living off wealth built on manipulation and legal theft. His voice was hollow. Welcome to the American frontier. This is how empires are made. No, Maylene's voice was firm. That's how your father's empire was made. It doesn't have to be how it continues. Cade looked at her sharply. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way to make this right without destroying everything. Maylene pulled out a clean sheet of paper, began making notes. The water rights. If they were acquired fraudulently, they can be renegotiated, shared. We could establish a cooperative access system. My father will never agree to that. Then we don't ask his permission. Maylene met Cade's eyes. You're his son, his heir. Eventually, this ranch will be yours. When that happens, you can change things. But we need to prepare now. Need to understand exactly what was done and how to undo the worst of it. And in the meantime, those 4 men are still going to hang. Maylene set down her pen. What if they didn't? The marshal's already on his way. They killed Frank. There are witnesses, evidence. What if we gave the marshal a different story? Maylene's mind was racing now, seeing possibilities. What if we documented everything your father did to steal the water rights, presented it as mitigating evidence, showed that these men were acting out of desperation, that they'd exhausted legal options, that they believed they had no choice? The law doesn't care about motives. No, but juries do. Public opinion does. And your father cares very much about his reputation. Maylene pulled the water rights files toward her. If this becomes public, if people understand how the Ashford fortune was really built, it damages everything he's worked for. His political connections, his business relationships, his legacy. Cade was staring at her now, something like wonder in his expression. You'd use that as leverage, threaten exposure unless he shows mercy. I'd use it to force negotiation. The men in the barn get reduced sentences, manslaughter instead of murder, 5 years instead of hanging. In exchange, we agree to renegotiate water access, establish fair sharing agreements, make restitution. He'll never go for it. He'd rather let his empire burn than admit wrongdoing. Maybe. Or maybe he's smart enough to see that the territory is changing. Montana will be a state soon. The old frontier rules won't work anymore. Laws will matter. Public opinion will matter. And a reputation for fairness will be worth more than one for ruthless conquest. Maylene organized the documents, her hands steady despite her racing heart. We present it as pragmatism, not morality, a way to secure the ranch's future instead of clinging to a past that's already dying. Cade was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Finally, he spoke. When I chose you, I thought I was just making a decision my father couldn't control. I didn't realize I was choosing someone who might actually change everything. I haven't changed anything yet. No, but you will. He stood, came around the desk, and pulled her to her feet. His hands framed her face, his eyes searching hers. This is dangerous, Maylene. If my father thinks you're trying to undermine him, I'm trying to save him from himself, from making choices that will destroy everything when the territory becomes civilized enough to care about how wealth was acquired. She covered his hands with hers. But I can't do it alone. I need you to trust me, to stand with me even if it means standing against your father. I'm tired of standing against him, but I'm more tired of standing with him while he does terrible things. Cade kissed her forehead, gentle and deliberate. All right, we try it your way, but carefully. My father's dangerous when cornered. Then we make sure he doesn't feel cornered. We make him think it's his idea. The marshal arrived 2 days later, a weathered man in his 50s named Coleman, who'd seen enough frontier justice to be skeptical of everyone's version of the truth. Gideon met him with the 4 prisoners, the evidence of their attack, and Maylene's carefully documented confessions. Open and shut, Coleman said, reviewing the papers. They'll hang within a month. Perhaps, Maylene said quietly. She was standing in the corner of Gideon's study, where she'd been told to wait in case the marshal had questions about her documentation. Now she stepped forward, another file in her hands. Or perhaps there are complicating factors the court should consider. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Maylene, Marshal Coleman, I've prepared a second report, one that documents the history of water rights disputes in this valley, including several irregularities in how the Ashford claims were established. She set the file on the desk, her heart pounding but her voice steady. If this case goes to trial, these documents will become public record. The defense will use them to argue provocation, diminished responsibility. They'll paint my father-in-law as a thief who used legal manipulation to steal from desperate families. The room went very still. Gideon's face was carved from stone, his eyes promising violence. But Coleman had picked up the file, was reading with growing interest. These survey markers, Coleman said slowly, this witness testimony. If this is accurate, it's accurate, Maylene said. I verified every document, cross-referenced every claim. Mr. Ashford's water rights are legal, but they were acquired through methods that won't stand up to public scrutiny. You dare! Gideon started to rise. Father, sit down! Cade's voice cut across the room, hard and commanding. He'd been standing by the door, and now he moved to stand beside Maylene. She's right. If this goes to trial, everything comes out. Your reputation, your political connections, your plans for statehood. All of it gets dragged through the mud while those 4 men get turned into martyrs. They killed one man in what they believed was defense of their property rights. A good lawyer will get that down to manslaughter. Might even get them acquitted entirely if the jury sympathizes with their grievances. Cade's voice was calm, reasonable, inexorable. Is that really what you want? A public trial that exposes how you built this ranch? Coleman was watching this family drama with the detached interest of someone who'd learned to stay out of rich people's fights. Seems to me, he said carefully, there might be room for negotiation here, if all parties were willing to be reasonable. What kind of negotiation? Gideon's voice was dangerous. The kind where nobody hangs, nobody goes on trial, and nobody's dirty laundry gets aired in public. Coleman closed the file. Reduce charges. Restitution. Some kind of agreement about water access that keeps everyone from killing each other. I've seen it work before when both sides had something to lose. I have nothing to lose, Gideon said coldly. You have everything to lose, Maylene said quietly. Your legacy, your son's future, the ranch you built. Right now you're seen as a successful frontier businessman. If these documents become public, you'll be remembered as a thief who used legal tricks to steal from his neighbors. Is that really the legacy you want? Gideon stared at her with such fury that Maylene thought he might strike her. But Cade had moved closer, his presence a shield, and Martha had appeared in the doorway, summoned somehow, prepared to intervene. The silence stretched thin and terrible. Finally, Gideon spoke. What exactly are you proposing? Maylene had prepared for this, had spent 2 days working out terms that might be acceptable, that might actually work. The 4 men plead guilty to manslaughter. They serve 5 years, with possibility of parole for good behavior. In exchange, the Ashford Ranch establishes a water cooperative with the Peterson Ranch and 2 other properties. Shared access to Copper Creek based on a formula that accounts for livestock and acreage. We pay restitution to Frank's family, enough to set them up comfortably. And we fund a legal review of all water rights in the valley to establish clear, fair guidelines going forward. You want me to give away what I spent 20 years acquiring? I want you to share what you took, Maylene corrected. There's a difference. You'll still control the largest share of water access. You'll still be the most powerful rancher in the valley. But you'll also be seen as fair, as someone who values stability and cooperation over conquest. That's worth something in a territory that's becoming civilized. It's worth everything, Cade added. When Montana becomes a state, the men who'll have real power are the ones people trust, not the ones they fear. Coleman nodded slowly. The boy's right. Times are changing. The old ways won't work much longer. Gideon stood, walked to the window, looked out at his empire. Maylene watched the rigid line of his shoulders, saw the battle being fought behind that iron control. Everything in him wanted to refuse, to crush this rebellion, to remind everyone who held power here. But he was also brilliant, calculating, and he could see the shape of the future as clearly as Maylene could. I want their guilty pleas in writing, he said finally, not turning around. I want guarantees they'll never take action against Ashford property again. And I want this water cooperative structured so that I maintain majority control. Done, Maylene said immediately. I'll draft the agreements myself. And those files? Gideon turned, his eyes finding hers. They disappear. Permanently. The originals stay with me, Maylene said, as insurance, but they won't be made public as long as the agreement holds. It was a bold demand. Outrageous, really. A woman who'd been on this ranch less than a month telling Gideon Ashford that she would keep evidence of his crimes as leverage. But she held his gaze, refusing to back down, and saw the moment he recognized her for what she was. Not a victim, or a decoration, or a pawn, but a player in her own right. You're either very brave or very foolish, he said. I'm practical, same as you. Maylene kept her voice level. This protects everyone, including you. Gideon studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Coleman. Draw up the paperwork. I'll sign whatever keeps this quiet and keeps my name clean. But if those men violate the terms, if they so much as look at my property wrong, the deal's off and they hang. Understood? Understood, Coleman said. He looked at Maylene with something approaching respect. Ma'am, I'll need your help with those agreements. Make sure everything's documented proper. Of course. Maylene gathered her files, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. I'll have drafts ready by tomorrow. She left the study with Cade behind her, feeling Gideon's eyes boring into her back. In the hallway, her legs finally began to shake. Cade caught her elbow, steadied her. You just backed my father into a corner and made him think it was his idea to cooperate, he said quietly. That was either the smartest or most dangerous thing I've ever seen. Both, Maylene managed. Definitely both. Martha was waiting in the kitchen, her expression unreadable. Well? He agreed, to all of it. Maylene sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. We're establishing a water cooperative. The prisoners get reduced sentences. Nobody hangs. Martha's face softened slightly. You saved their lives, and maybe saved this ranch from tearing itself apart in the process. Not bad for someone who's been here a month. I haven't saved anything yet. Still have to make it work. Maylene looked at her hands, seeing them tremble. What if I'm wrong? What if this makes everything worse? Then we deal with it, Cade said. He sat beside her, his hand covering hers. Together. But I don't think you're wrong. I think you just did what no one else has had the courage to do, forced my father to face the consequences of his choices. The next 3 weeks were a blur of negotiations, legal documents, and carefully managed meetings. Maylene drafted water-sharing agreements that were fair, but left the Ashfords with the largest allocation. She worked with Coleman to structure plea deals that satisfied the territorial court. She met with Peterson and the other affected ranchers, listened to their grievances, found compromises that addressed their needs without bankrupting the Ashford operation. It was exhausting, complicated work. Every conversation was a tightrope walk between competing interests. Every document had to be precise, leaving no room for future disputes. And through it all, Gideon watched with cold calculation, looking for weakness, testing whether she could actually deliver on what she'd promised. But Maylene had learned something in 12 years of invisibility: how to see the shape of things, to understand what people needed even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. She used that now, finding the sweet spots where everyone got enough to feel satisfied, even if no one got everything they wanted. The agreements were signed on a cold November morning. Peterson and 3 other ranchers sat across the table from Gideon and Cade, with Coleman serving as witness. Maylene sat at the end, the documents arranged in front of her, her heart pounding as she watched men who'd been ready to kill each other put their names to paper. This cooperative lasts 20 years, Peterson said, reading the terms one final time, with renegotiation every 5 years based on documented need. And the Ashford Ranch maintains final authority on emergency water restrictions, Gideon countered. During drought or crisis, my word stands. With consultation from the cooperative board, Maylene added firmly, no unilateral decisions. Peterson and Gideon locked eyes across the table. Years of resentment and conflict hung between them. Then Peterson nodded slowly. Fair enough. Long as we got a voice. You have a voice, Cade said. We all do. That's the point. One by one, they signed. Maylene witnessed each signature, feeling the weight of what they were creating. Not perfect justice, but workable compromise. Not restoration of what had been stolen, but prevention of future theft. When it was done, Peterson stood, extended his hand to Gideon. Don't think this makes us friends. Don't think I've forgiven what you did. But it's a start, better than more killing. Gideon shook his hand, his grip firm. Agreed. Now get off my property. Peterson almost smiled. Yes, sir, but it's our creek now. Best remember that. After they left, Gideon turned to Maylene. You realize you just gave away a significant portion of my water rights. I helped you secure what you have left and ensure it won't be challenged for another 20 years, Maylene corrected. That's not giving away. That's investment in stability. Semantics. Strategy. Maylene met his eyes. You taught me that everything's negotiable. I'm just applying the lesson. For the first time since she'd met him, Gideon Ashford smiled at her with something that might have been genuine respect. My son chose better than I gave him credit for. Welcome to the family, Maylene. Properly, this time. It wasn't love. It wasn't even approval, really. But it was acknowledgement. And from Gideon Ashford, that counted as victory. The 4 prisoners were transferred to the territorial prison 3 days later to serve their sentences. Louisa cried, but she also attended the sentencing, and when the judge handed down 5 years instead of death, Maylene saw something like relief in her face. Justice wasn't pretty, but it was better than vengeance. Winter came hard that year, burying the valley in snow, freezing the creeks, testing the new water agreements in practical ways. The cooperative held. When one of Peterson's wells froze, Cade sent men to help dig a new one. When Ashford cattle broke through a fence onto shared land, Peterson's sons helped round them up instead of shooting them for trespass. Small things. But they mattered. Maylene spent the winter learning the ranch in new ways. Not just the books, but the land itself. Cade took her riding on days when the weather cleared, showing her the boundaries, the creek systems, the high meadows where cattle would graze come spring. She learned to read the sky for storms, to judge the health of livestock, to understand the rhythms of a working ranch. And slowly, day by day, the bedroom wall between her and Cade came down. It started with conversations, late nights talking about ranch business, about books they'd read, about dreams they'd had before life taught them to dream smaller. Then came touch, hands brushing as they worked together, his arm around her shoulders when the winter wind cut sharp, her head on his shoulder as they rode back from checking fence lines. The night he finally knocked on her door, instead of retreating to his own room, Maylene's heart hammered. She opened it to find him standing there in shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, his eyes uncertain. I know we agreed, he said quietly. Privacy, space, time to know each other. But it's been 3 months and I'm tired of sleeping alone when my wife is 10 feet away. So I'm asking, may I come in? Maylene stepped back, holding the door open. Yes. He crossed the threshold and she closed the door behind him, and for the first time since their wedding, they were truly alone together without walls between them. Cade's hands framed her face, gentle and sure. I'm falling in love with you, he said. Have been for weeks. Thought you should know before I... Maylene kissed him, cutting off the words, answering with action what she couldn't quite articulate yet. She wasn't sure if what she felt was love, but it was close enough that she wanted to find out where it led. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they'd used to learn each other's minds. And afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and winter cold, Maylene felt something she'd never expected to feel in this house. Safe. Tell me something, Cade said, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. That first day when I chose you, were you terrified? Yes, I thought you were making a mistake. Was I? Maylene considered the question seriously. I don't think either of us knew what we were choosing. You thought you were claiming independence. I thought I was escaping, but what we actually did was save each other, Cade finished, from becoming people we didn't want to be. Maybe, Maylene turned in his arms to face him, or maybe we're still becoming those people. Just together now. I can live with that. He kissed her forehead. Stay with me tonight. In here. No more separate rooms. Your father will notice. Let him notice. We're married. It's about time we acted like it. So Maylene stayed, and when morning came, she woke in Cade's arms for the first time. Through the window, she could see snow falling soft and steady, covering the valley in white. Somewhere out there, men who'd wanted to kill each other were sharing water because she'd found a way to make conflict serve everyone's interests. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Spring came late but glorious, melting the snow in rushing torrents that filled the creeks and tested the new water agreements. The cooperative held, and when minor disputes arose, whose cattle had priority at which watering hole, whether someone was taking more than their allocation, Maylene mediated with patience and careful documentation. By summer, she'd become something she'd never imagined, essential not just to the Ashford operation, but to the valley itself. Ranchers who'd never spoken to each other without weapons now came to her office for arbitration. She kept records, settled disputes, ensured the agreement stayed fair. And then, on a hot August morning, a rider appeared from the Hale Ranch. Maylene was in the garden with Louisa, harvesting vegetables, when Martha called her to the house. The rider was young, dusty from hard travel, his face grave. Mrs. Ashford, I've got a message from your sister. She says it's urgent. Maylene's hands went cold. What's happened? Your father, Mr. Hale. He's been hurt. Bad. Some kind of accident with a wagon. Your sister asks if you can come, says he's asking for you. The world tilted. Gerald Hale was dying and asking for her. The man who'd given her shelter and nothing else, who'd sold her in marriage to pay his debts, who'd never once treated her like a daughter. He was dying, and somehow that mattered. I'll go, she said. Then looking at Cade, who'd appeared on the porch, we'll go, if you'll come with me. Of course. They rode out within the hour, Maylene, Cade, and the messenger. The journey to the Hale Ranch took half a day, and with every mile, Maylene's dread grew. She hadn't seen Elena since the wedding, hadn't spoken to any of them. She'd sent money once, after she started earning a salary, a small amount with no note attached. She didn't know if they'd kept it or burned it. The Hale Ranch looked worse than she remembered. The fences sagged lower, the paint had peeled further, the garden had gone to weeds. Constance met them at the door, her face drawn and exhausted. He's upstairs, she said without preamble. The doctor says it's only a matter of time, internal bleeding from when the wagon rolled over him. How long? Maylene asked. Hours, maybe. He's been asking for you since yesterday. Keep saying your name. Constance's voice broke slightly. I don't know why. You're the last person who should matter to him. Maylene climbed the stairs to the room where Gerald lay dying. Elena sat beside the bed, her face blotchy from crying. When she saw Maylene, something complicated crossed her expression. Resentment, relief, exhaustion. He's awake, Elena said quietly, but not for long at a time. Maylene approached the bed. Gerald Hale looked small against the pillows, his face gray, his breathing shallow. His eyes opened when she drew near, struggled to focus. Maylene. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm here. She didn't know what else to say. I was wrong. Gerald's hand fumbled toward her, weak and trembling. About you. About everything. You were her daughter. I should have... He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I should have treated you like my own. Why didn't you? The question came out before Maylene could stop it. Because I was a coward. Because you reminded me of her, of what I lost, of my own failure. Gerald's eyes closed. You deserved better. I'm sorry. For all of it. The apology was too late, too small, too inadequate for 12 years of erasure. But it was also all he had to give. Maylene felt tears on her cheeks and didn't brush them away. "I forgive you," she said quietly, and found to her surprise that she meant it. Gerald died an hour later, holding Elena's hand on one side and Maylene's on the other. Whatever he'd been, cruel, weak, calculating, he'd also been a man who'd spent his whole life afraid of failing and had failed anyway. There was tragedy in that. The funeral was small. Constance had no money for anything elaborate. Maylene paid for everything: a simple coffin, a plot in the churchyard, food for the few neighbors who came. Cade stood beside her throughout, solid and supportive, saying little but present. Afterward, in the empty house, Elena finally spoke to her directly. "I hated you," she said, "for months, for taking what should have been mine, for ruining everything." "I know. But watching Father die, seeing how he regretted the way he treated you," Elena's voice caught. "Maybe I was wrong too, about what was taken from me, about what I deserved." "You deserved better than being bartered away to save a failing ranch," Maylene said. "We both did. What happens now, to this place?" Elena looked around the shabby parlor. "Constance wants to go back east. I have no money, no prospects, no future." Maylene made a decision that felt right. "Come stay with us, at the Ashford Ranch. You can help with the household or the books or whatever you're good at. We'll find you a place." "You do that? After everything?" "We're sisters. That should mean something." Maylene extended her hand. "So yes, I'll do that." Elena took her hand, held it tight, and for the first time since childhood, they were connected by choice rather than circumstance. They returned to the Ashford Ranch a week later with Elena, and what little she owned packed into a wagon. Gideon raised an eyebrow when he saw her, but said nothing. Martha set her up in a small room, put her to work in the kitchen, and watched her with the same careful assessment she'd given Maylene months before. Elena proved surprisingly capable. She had a talent for organization, for managing supplies, for coordinating the household staff in ways that freed Martha for other work. Within a month, she'd become indispensable. Within 2, she'd caught the attention of Thomas Beck, who started finding excuses to visit the house more often than ranch business required. Watching them circle each other with awkward courtesy, Maylene felt something like hope. Maybe both Hale daughters would find what they needed here. Maybe the choice Cade had made on that autumn day had saved more than just her. The territorial legislature met in October to vote on statehood. Gideon traveled to Helena, and when he returned, he was smiling, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually harsh face. "Montana will be a state within a year," he announced at supper. "And I've been asked to advise on water rights law for the new constitution." He looked directly at Maylene as he said it. "They want someone who understands practical implementation of cooperative systems. Someone with actual experience making these agreements work. I told them I had just the person. If you're willing." Maylene's breath caught. "You want me to help write state law?" "I want you to make sure those water cooperative agreements you forced me into become the template for the entire state. Might as well make my surrender into everyone else's policy." His smile was sharp. "Besides, you're better at this than I ever was." Time I admitted it. It was the closest Gideon would ever come to saying he'd been wrong. Maylene accepted it for what it was. "I'll do it," she said. "On one condition." Of course there's a condition. But Gideon didn't sound angry, almost amused. "What?" "We establish a fund for widows and children of men killed in water disputes, starting with Frank's family. Make sure no one else has to choose between legal fees and feeding their children." "That'll cost money." "The ranch can afford it, and it's the right thing to do." Gideon studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. "Done. Draft the proposal. I'll present it to the legislature." That winter, Maylene traveled to Helena 3 times, working with lawyers and legislators to transform her practical experience into legal framework. She testified before committees, debated with men who thought a Chinese woman had no business influencing state law, won arguments through sheer competence and unshakable confidence. By spring, when the Montana Constitution was ratified, water cooperative agreements were written into state law. Every major creek and river would be managed through shared access boards. Disputes would be mediated before they became violent, and a fund would support families harmed by the transition from frontier chaos to civilized governance. It wasn't perfect justice. It didn't undo the harm Gideon had done, but it prevented future harm, and in the end, that was what mattered most. The night Montana officially became a state, Maylene stood on the porch of the Ashford Ranch, looking out at the valley that had become home. Cade came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist, his presence warm and solid. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That a year ago, I was standing in a corner of my father's house, expecting nothing, wanting nothing, invisible to everyone." Maylene leaned into him. "And now I've helped write state law, changed how an entire territory manages its most precious resource, made powerful men listen to me." "You did more than that. You changed me, changed this ranch, changed what's possible out here." Cade kissed her temple. "You're remarkable, you know that?" "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." "No, you're both, and I love you for it." Maylin turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd chosen her when he could have chosen safety, comfort, approval. The man who'd stood beside her while she challenged his father, rewrote agreements, demanded justice. The man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. "I love you too," she said. "Took me a while to realize it, but I do." They stood together as stars emerged, as the valley settled into the quiet of a spring evening, as the future they were building together stretched ahead full of possibility. Behind them, the house blazed with light. Martha and Louisa preparing supper, Elena and Thomas talking quietly in the parlor, Gideon in his study reviewing paperwork that Maylene would check tomorrow. The Ashford Ranch, built on conquest and maintained through ruthlessness, was slowly transforming into something better. Not perfect, not innocent, but moving in the right direction. And at the center of that transformation was a woman who'd been told her whole life that she didn't matter, that she should stay invisible, that she existed only to serve others' needs. Maylin Ashford had proven them all wrong. She'd been chosen, yes, but more importantly, she'd chosen herself. Chosen to matter. Chosen to use whatever power she could claim to make the world a little more just. That was the real victory. Not the marriage or the position or the respect she'd earned, but the simple radical act of refusing to disappear. She'd started as the daughter no one wanted, the woman expected to serve and endure. She'd become the force that changed an empire, the voice that shaped a state, the person strong enough to demand that power serve justice instead of just itself. And standing there in the Montana darkness with Cade's arms around her and the future wide open ahead, Maylene finally understood what it meant to be free, not rescued, not saved, but seen, valued, and trusted to use her strength in ways that mattered. That was worth everything. Worth the risk she'd taken riding away from the Hale Ranch, worth the battles she'd fought to prove herself, worth the compromises she'd made to survive long enough to change things. She was Maylin Ashford, wife, accountant, mediator, lawmaker. The Chinese woman who'd transformed a frontier empire and proved that beauty might draw attention, but courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve were what truly changed destiny. And her story was just beginning.